Chapter 362. From space, Sea Paradise looked like a huge deep blue sphere. The blue color looked a little eerie, and it felt as if a pair of deep eyes were staring at them, and trying to awaken the fear in their hearts. Just like what Mo Hung had told Sillin, Sea Paradise did have a very strange magnetic field. Sillin and the others could sense it when they were approaching the planet, and some of the instruments inside the spaceplane were flashing and popping up. Under such circumstances, the Andryra family's technology finally came into effect. There were two sets of equipment on the spaceplane. One was for normal use, and it was about the same as the basic equipment on other starships and spaceplanes. The other was specially prepared for Sea Paradise. After switching the equipment one by one, the spaceplane returned to normal. "How is it? How do you feel?" Sillin asked Cheto. As for Huimao, the way he was staring at the display screen was enough to tell that he was completely fine and in high spirits. "It's fine. Although the magnetic field affects most machines, it doesn't affect us much. It's because we are individuals who can control ourselves, and those machines can't. However, the second set of instruments the Andryra family has is very special. The machine language they speak is different from normal machines, and I can learn a lot from them," Cheto replied. "That's good." Since Cheto wasn't affected by the planet's unusual magnetic field, Sillin was relieved. Cheto was a great help, and Sillin would have to spend a lot of effort without him. "We's don't act on your own when we enter the planet," Sillin instructed. MN. We's didn't even look back as it crouched next to the giant display screen, and watched the blue planet grow closer and closer. Its tail curled into an arc and swung back and forth. It was obvious that it was thinking of something again. Sillin pinched one of Huimao's ears and asked, "Did you really hear that?" "Yes, I did," Huimao promised. "Sillin, get ready. We're about to enter the planet," Faramir called out. The blue light was getting closer and closer. The spaceplane was a little bumpy as it entered the atmosphere. The effect of the abnormal magnetic field was the strongest at this time, so it was normal for a spaceplane to be in such a situation. That was why Lung had told everyone to be prepared. Otherwise, if they were not careful, they would be tossed to God knows where. The monitor in the control room showed the analysis of the outside environment by the instrument. The air composition was indeed not something that ordinary people could withstand. Even people with good physical fitness and A-rank genes might not be able to survive for more than half a day without the help of breathing equipment. As the entire planet was covered by the ocean, the humidity in the air was very high. Some of the ocean's surface would form a thin layer of clouds and fog. Aside from these thin layers of clouds and fog, Ocean Paradise's blue color was even deeper. Looking down from above, it looked like a boundless deep blue abyss. The equipment had already been distributed, and now everyone was organizing and changing their equipment. Sillin put on protective clothing and a breathing mask. The protective clothing was a product of the Andryra family's own invention. It was suitable for underwater activities, and its resistance to pressure was excellent. The protective clothing looked like a normal diving suit when it wasn't fully unfurled, but once it was unfurled in the ocean, one would realize that it was different from a normal diving suit. Cheto, don't you need to wear these?" Pescado and the others who were putting on the protective gear stared at the motionless Cheto in puzzlement. Even if they had to take off the protective gear and enter the adaptation period after landing, they couldn't just not put it on right now. No one could guarantee that they would be able to land safely later. And if things didn't go smoothly, they wouldn't have the time to adapt once they rushed out. "I don't need it," Cheto replied. Pescado and the others wore strange looks on their faces. "Are you not a normal human, but someone who lives in the water?" Cheto shook his head, but he didn't explain in detail. One of them shot Cheto a glance before pointing at Huimao, who was stretching his fat body. "Aren't you guys wearing some kind of protective gear? The atmosphere outside isn't like that of a habitable planet." Huimao flicked his ears. "No need, I'm not like you guys." Why did these words sound like they were filled with a strong sense of contempt? Pescado and the others, who were not convinced, loosened their breathing masks and said, "Actually, we don't have to wear these. We can also throw away our breathing masks when we really enter the water. Why don't we have a competition then?" "All right, there's no time for you to move around when the time comes." Lung patted his friends after putting on the protective gear. If they hadn't obtained the star map before, Lung might have allowed them to move around freely. But now that they knew the location of the Tear of God, they had to put all their energy into searching for it. Pescado and the others calmed down a lot after Lung's declaration. However, they were puzzled by something. Something was wrong with Lung. He looked a lot more serious than they had imagined. Could he be nervous? Have you finished scanning the map yet? Lung asked. The Andryra family had several global maps of Ocean Paradise. But due to the uniqueness of the place, they would always get a different map every time they sent a team to Ocean Paradise. Lung had a map from 10 years ago that showed 3 relatively large coral reefs, but all of them had sunk a lot due to the movement of the Earth's crust. Therefore, they had to scan the map again every time they came here. Although the second set of equipment could withstand the abnormal magnetic field, it was accompanied by a much slower calculation speed. It took almost 20 minutes to scan and draw the map. If it were in a normal environment, it would have taken less than a minute to get a fairly accurate map. Young master, there's an atoll near the coordinates you've given us. It's not big, about 1 kilometer in diameter, and there's a warm current passing through it. The salinity of the seawater is high, and I'm afraid that a few species of fish and sea beasts will appear there on a large scale. Lung pondered over his next plan while listening to his subordinates report. The old man's previous plan definitely couldn't be used, and the coordinates that Lung had given them were not the ones they had planned beforehand. Therefore, it would be a problem for them to land and rest there. There was only one atoll in the sea around the place that the star map was pointing at. Perhaps this atoll was already very big in the eyes of many people, but for Lung and the others, this atoll was still too small. This was because they had to take into account the sea beasts that lived on the atoll, and the surrounding fishes. Just like many large animals on land, the coral reefs were also filled with the territories of all kinds of sea beasts. Those ferocious fellows were not willing to give up even the slightest bit of their territory. Moreover, there were no real land plates other than the coral reefs in Ocean Paradise. Therefore, every coral reef was a battlefield, and battles for territory were happening at every moment. Looking at the analysis map of that atoll, Lung said, "The spaceplane definitely can't land." The image displayed on the scanner made Lung think of many things. People like them only needed a glance to determine the approximate distribution of the population on the coral reefs, as well as the approximate territory of the sea beasts in each area. Moreover, the sea beasts of Ocean Paradise were different from the sea beasts of other planets. These sea beasts were very difficult to tame, and the tamers needed a period of adaptation before they could gradually display their usefulness. Therefore, it was not a good idea to use the advantages of a tamer to deal with these sea beasts. Currently, there were places on the atoll that were filled with small groups of sea beasts lying on their stomachs, basking in the sun, while there were other places that looked empty, but not a single small sea beast dared to set foot there. That was because those places were the territory of some big guy, and anyone who went there would be courting death. In order to clear out a place to rest, it would be better to start with the small groups of sea beasts. Lung was just about to order his subordinates to use their weapons to clear out a place, when Huimao jumped onto Silin's shoulder and looked at Lung. "I'll go. I'll clean up those little bugs." Little bugs. A few of Lung's subordinates had strange expressions on their faces. Those so-called little bugs, even if they were young sea beasts, were more than 1/2 meter long. Moreover, they all had hard outer armor, sharp claws, and razor-sharp teeth. They were definitely not gentle beasts. Moreover, compared to the fat cat in front of them, those little bugs could practically be elevated to the level of giant beasts. Perhaps Pescado was a little afraid of Huimao because of what happened in the past, but none of them had really seen Huimao's great abilities before. When they were communicating earlier, Huimao did not make a move either. Therefore, some people wanted to laugh at Huimao's words. "Hey, little fat cat, although the little bugs over there look so small." That person used his thumb and forefinger to make a sesame seed-sized gesture, then used his 2 arms to make a meter-long gesture. In reality, they are at least this big. Huimao looked at the person who spoke with disdain, and said to Silin, "Uncultured people are so pitiful." That person still wanted to argue, but was stopped by Lung. "Silin, what do you think?" Lung asked. Sillin twisted the hair on the back of the fat cat's neck in front of him. Are you confident? Absolutely. Can you control the situation? Absolutely. Sillin looked at Huimao suspiciously, and only let go when Huimao raised his paw and swore. It was not that Sillin did not believe in Huimao's ability, but he understood Huimao's ability too well, and this guy's habit of getting carried away when he was excited. There were a lot of sea beasts on the atoll. Now they just needed to clear a place for them to rest. If they made too much of a commotion, it would definitely cause a chain reaction, and sea beasts from other places might come over to join in the fun. That was not what Sillin wanted to see. After all, there were only a few people here, and not a large hunting team. Lung also told Huimao about the action plan, and the reward for Huimao if they successfully cleared the area, which made Huimao value this task a lot more. Wheeze, I'll leave it to you to clear the area. Don't worry, remember what you said about the reward. Huimao clenched his paw, and was eager to try. Then should I lower the aircraft a little? Someone asked. No need. As soon as Sillin opened the cabin door, Huimao shot out like an arrow from a bow, and the others saw through the image displayed on the screen that Huimao that shot out spread its wings in the air, and flew towards the atoll with a loud flap. Damn. Are those wings? Are those wings? That cat actually has wings. Pescado and the others looked at the image displayed on the screen as if it was a miracle. Celine was also looking at the screen. However, he was prepared at all times. If the cat got carried away by its success later, he would have to remind it. There was a place on the atoll where some small sea beasts were lying densely, and not far away, there were some plants that were 20 to 30 meters tall, and it looked like a small jungle. This small jungle was the boundary between the two territories. Huimao's task was to clear the small jungle near the group of small sea beasts, as well as part of the coral reef area around it. The small sea beasts that were lying on the coral reef and basking in the sun were huddled together. Some of them were fighting, and some of them were squinting their eyes and straightening their backs to absorb the sunlight, looking very comfortable. Their sharp claws moved from time to time, and they left thin marks on the coral reef below. The coral reef in Ocean Paradise was a few times harder than normal coral reefs, so if it was a normal coral reef, these sea beasts would probably be as easy as scratching carrots. The sea beast lying at the highest point suddenly opened its eyes and looked at the sky above. There was a shadow getting closer and closer, and it could also feel that the other party was looking at it with an unfriendly gaze. This feeling made it very uncomfortable, so it moved its back to its fullest, making it look twice as big as it was before. This sea beast let out a low, warning growl from its throat, causing the surrounding sea beasts to raise their heads one after another. After seeing the person in the sky, they also let out a series of warning sounds. Even if it was a weakling that they thought was beneath them, they would still let out an absolute warning sound. Therefore, before Huimao flew there, the sea beasts in that area all let out a low warning sound. Along with these warning sounds, the big mouths full of sharp teeth that were still guarding the door opened, and they were waiting for the next food. Huimao's eyes became brighter and brighter, and it sped up. When it was nearly 10 meters away from the coral reef, Huimao retracted its wings and plunged into the group of sea beasts. Then a huge mouth that looked like that of a cat appeared in the group of sea beasts, and it was only a huge mouth that could be seen. This huge mouth swallowed the sea beasts one after another, and the first one to be swallowed was the one that was originally lying at the highest point. Before it could even wave its claws, it was swallowed by Huimao's huge mouth, and it didn't even have time to squeak. In the aircraft in the air, in front of the display screen, Pescado and the others were shocked at first, but then they fell silent. They suddenly realized that this cat was not as harmless as it looked. Moreover, this cat's appetite was really huge. In less than half a minute, with Huimao's landing point as the center, all the sea beasts within a radius of 10 meters were swallowed, and not a single one was left. As for the rest of the small sea beasts, they had already fled when they saw that the situation was not good. Huimao symbolically chased a few steps, and drove away the remaining sea beasts that were still lingering around, unwilling to leave. So Pescado and the others saw this scene again. A chubby little Huimao chased a group of sea beasts that were much larger than it, and they hurriedly jumped into the sea to escape. After clearing a satisfactory area, Huimao jumped to the highest point, and told Scylla and the others that they could land. After that, it tilted its head and scratched its ears with its hind legs, yawned, and lay there lazily, licking its paws and wiping its face. The people in the aircraft, including Ingweji, who had always been serious, looked at Scylla with very envious eyes. After all, it was really a very happy thing to have such a pet. Look, it took a lot of effort for them to do this, but a cat was able to do it. When dealing with sea beasts, people would at most hunt them down, but Huimao just swallowed them directly, and from the very beginning, it had established itself as a high-ranking predator in the food chain. The beast race had their own way of solving problems, so everything that Huimao did was surprisingly effective, and the effect was much better than when Lung and the others used force. "Let's go, we can go down now," Scylla said to the others. A slightly smaller aircraft flew out from the original aircraft. This smaller aircraft was the flying tool that Scylla and the others used to fly on the surface of the sea, and it was also a navigation tool in the sea. This aircraft could dive deep into the sea. People had heard of the flying vehicle, but not many people knew about the triamphibious aircraft. The triamphibious aircraft were extremely expensive to build. They could dive deep into the sea as a submarine, travel between star zones as a normal aircraft, and even run on land as a small mobile base. The cost of the one that Lung and the others were piloting right now was even higher. A triamphibious aircraft that could resist the abnormal magnetic field was extremely rare. This triamphibious aircraft landed in the coral reef area that Huimao had cleared out. There was still a group of sea beasts wandering around in the area, paying attention to the movements of Scylla and the others. Their two front claws moved forward a little, but they pulled back in the next moment. Huimao bared his teeth in that direction, and the sea beasts hurriedly jumped into the sea and ran away. "Let's rest here for a bit, and let our bodies adapt to the environment here," Lung said. After using the apparatus to measure the surrounding environment, Lung took off his mask and the protective suit he was wearing. He slowly stretched his body and moved his limbs. Scylla had always known that Lung wasn't a normal human, but he didn't expect him to be able to endure in this kind of atmospheric environment. This is the advantage of people like us. We have a sense of familiarity with the environment of the sea. Although it's a little difficult here, we'll get used to it after a while, Lung said. After Lung, the rest of the group also took off their masks one after another. However, two of them put them on every once in a while. Their ability to adapt to this kind of atmospheric environment wasn't as good as the others. Scylla also gave it a try. It was true that he wasn't used to this kind of atmospheric environment, but it was fine. He endured it a little longer than the average person, and it would definitely take him a lot more time to adapt to it completely than Lung and the others. Huimao couldn't stay idle after a while. It jumped left and right, and even searched for some sea beast eggs on the coral reefs for a change of pace. Scylla allowed it to do whatever it wanted as long as it didn't provoke other sea beasts on its own. Cheto was collecting some data and recording the unusual scenery around them. Scylla took off his protective suit and felt the different air pressure in the air. Then he started moving his limbs just like Lung and the others. This was the advantage of his constitution. A normal person's blood vessels would have burst already. Scylla was stretching his legs when he heard a cat's meow from the forest. "Oh my meow, there's a treasure." Chapter 363. Scylla followed the sound and saw Huimao squatting in front of a plant, his claws digging into the reef next to the plant. Rumble. A small round ball rolled out as Huimao retracted his claws. It was the size of a pigeon egg, and was a bright blue. "Scylla, I think this thing is worth a lot." Huimao bent his claws and fiddled with the crystal-like ball. Scylla picked up the ball and looked at it. It was cool to the touch, but not too cold. It had a faint plant fragrance, and it was very refreshing. "Oh, I didn't think there would be something like this here." Lung walked over. "People call it the guardian heart." "Guardian heart?" Huimao listened carefully. Lung's explanation made him feel that this crystal-like ball was really worth a lot of money. "Yes, this is something that can only be found in some special areas of the sea. The quality of the guardian heart produced in sea heaven is the best, and the effect is also the best." Lung explained the origin and use of the guardian heart to Scylla and Huimao. This crystal-like ball was actually synthesized from the roots of some plants on the coral reef. Its purpose was to repel sea beasts and other beasts and insects that ate the plants. After the synthesis of the roots, the ball would slowly move towards the surface, but it would not come out. There would be many of these crystals around the plant near the surface. They would form a circle to protect the plant and repel some small sea beasts. As for the large sea beasts, even if they couldn't be repelled, they could make them lose their appetite for the plant and not bite it. The smell of the guardian heart is very comfortable to humans, but it's like something disgusting to the sea beasts. So when you see a plant on a coral reef full of sea beasts without any small sea beasts around it, it means that the plant's roots have synthesized the guardian heart. Strangely, many researchers have tried to synthesize the medicine from these crystals, but the results were not ideal. So the natural crystal's price in the market has always been very high. The guardian heart from sea heaven has always been the most expensive of these crystals. If it was this one, it would probably fetch a price of 6 to 7 digits. We can dig more of these things, but if they aren't fully formed and haven't been moved to the surface, we don't need to dig them. Leave them for the plants to chase away sea beasts. Lung's last sentence was directed at Huimao. Looking at Huimao's eyes that were growing brighter and brighter, especially when he heard the words very valuable. Those cat eyes were especially bright. While they were talking, Cheto walked over from the other side of the room. There are a lot of hallucinogenic substances in the seawater. The indigenous creatures can develop resistance to them, but outsiders can't. Cheto showed some analysis data to Silin and mentioned the distribution of the sea beasts living on the coral reefs. The sea beasts and some of the fish in the sea can't be eaten directly, Lung said. Suddenly, he recalled that Huimao ate a big meal when he was cleaning up this area. Lung turned to look at Huimao, who was digging excitedly for crystals next to other plants. He looked at Silin and asked, "Is it really okay for that cat to eat anything?" "It's fine. It can still consume these things, so don't worry about it." Silin was already used to it. Back in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, Huimao ate a lot of sea beasts. Although the sea beasts here were a little special, they weren't enough to give Huimao a stomachache. "Young master, the scanners have found something," someone said from the other side. After landing on the atoll, Lung's subordinates quickly put their scanners into the seawater to investigate the situation around them. Lung especially asked his subordinates to put a couple more scanners in the direction the star map was pointing at. "What's going on?" Lung asked. Silin and Cheto also walked over, leaving behind the gray cat who was still digging for treasures around a couple of plants in the small forest. The scanners have descended to 3,000 meters below the water surface. This is the result. The man passed the electronic board to Lung. There was a wavy line on the electronic board. Due to the uniqueness of the environment here and the strangeness of the planet, the scanners didn't have any detailed data. All they could do was display some images in areas with abnormal energy waves and draw them into a 3D map. Every depth corresponded to a point on the 3D map, and the scanners detected an anomaly at the 3,000-meter mark. From that point on, the color of the 3D map began to change. As the scanners continued to descend, the color on the 3D map deepened. Lung looked very excited when he saw the result on the 3D map. He knew that the tier of gods had to be at that place because the energy reflection there was different from the rest of the sea. Up until now, this was the only place where the scanners had detected an anomaly. The scanners in the other parts of the sea didn't show anything like this. Why are there stairs forming here? Is this a normal phenomenon? Silin pointed at a place on the 3D map and asked. There was a steep slope below the coral reef, and from the 3D map drawn by the scanners, it was clear that there was a staircase at the top of the slope. One end of the staircase extended all the way down to the seabed. A staircase like this isn't meant for humans. Could it be a sea beast? Lung said. No one knew if it was man-made or natural, but they had to admit that the staircase gave them a very strange feeling. Keep paying attention to the scanners in this area and prepare yourselves. We're going to move after the scanners are done. Lung instructed the others. Yua. Suddenly, a long howl came from the small forest where Huimao was. Celine and the others turned their heads to look. Between the trees, there was a tail with dark stripes swaying. The plants that were 20 to 30 meters tall couldn't hide this tail at all. The branches and leaves of those plants were snapped by the huge tail and scattered in all directions. Some of the smaller sea beasts nearby were frightened by the howl and fled in all directions. Pooh! Blue blood sprayed out and splashed on the large leaves of the plants, making a rustling sound. The twitching of the big tail and the movement of the leaves gradually subsided. Not long after, a rustling sound came from afar. The leaves of the small forest swayed, and soon the head of a large sea beast appeared. To Lung and the others' astonishment, Wheeze bit down on a long tentacle around the sea beast's mouth and dragged it over to them. At first glance, the size of the sea beast was really exciting. In comparison, the difference in size between the sea beast that was cleaned up earlier was much smaller. The sea beast that Huimao dragged over looked like an eel. Its body was almost 5 meters in diameter. There were many pairs of legs on its torso. Compared to the smaller sea beasts that Huimao cleaned up before, this sea beast was probably at a higher level of the food chain. As Huimao dragged it, the sea beast gradually revealed its full appearance, and there was a long wound on its abdomen. Blue blood was flowing out, and because of Huimao's dragging, it formed a blue trail behind it. After Huimao dragged the sea beast in front of Silin, he asked Silin and the others, "Do you want to eat it?" Pescado and the others shook their heads. Looking at the sea beast that had died with its mouth wide open, revealing its sharp teeth, Pescado and the others didn't have any appetite at all. Just the blue trail and some of the internal organs on it made Pescado feel a little nauseous. Something's wrong. That sea beast isn't strictly an amphibious sea beast. Although it can crawl on the coral reefs for a while, it doesn't stay there for long. It will only rush to the coral reefs when it's hunting, but it's obviously not hunting now. Besides, all the small sea beasts in this area have been chased away by Wheeze, so what's this big guy doing here? Lung said while rubbing his chin. The gray cat licked the blue blood on its paw and hurriedly clarified itself. It came out of the sea. At first I didn't want to deal with it because I was busy digging for treasures, but who would have thought that it would charge straight at me? There are still a lot of gems I dug out over there, and I can't let it eat them. I really didn't want to cause trouble. This guy just bumped into me. Ingweji looked at the sea and said, "There's a school of sawtooth fish." Sawtooth fish were recorded in the information collected by the Andryra family, and it was quite detailed. This was a typical species. Sawtooth fish lived in the middle and upper layers of the sea, and they moved in groups. Moreover, every school of fish was very large, and tens of thousands of sawtooth fish were enough to make some of the larger sea beasts in the middle and upper layers flinch. Adult sawtooth fish could reach up to 5 meters long, and their upper and lower jaws could open up to 270 degrees, and their powerful bite force could directly crush the bones of the small sea beasts. Therefore, when the Andryra family came over, they would generally stay far away from this school of fish. This was not a school of fish that could escape even if it was the first drop of blood. Those sawtooth fish are hunting in a circle. That big guy just wanted to hide on the coral reefs, that's all. Ingweji continued. In about 5 minutes, the vanguard of the sawtooth fish will pass this area of the atoll. Lung sighed. In other words, even if we want to make a move, we have to wait for this group of troublesome guys to leave first. Ingweji nodded seriously and said, "Theoretically, yes." Silin had to admit that in the marine environment, his perception was indeed not as sensitive as someone like Ingweji. The reason why Ingweji could say these words with such certainty was also because of the sea beasts and sea fishes in the sea. Ingweji was indeed one of the top 10 bodyguards of the old fox Andryra Phocas. To be able to adapt to the new environment and start taming sea beasts in such a short time. Go into the aircraft. There will be a lot of sea beasts coming up to the coral reefs later. Let's avoid this wave first. Lung called out to Silin to take refuge in the aircraft. Huimao handed the guardian heart to Silin for safekeeping, and prepared to stay outside to watch the show. Anyway, if the coral reefs were too crowded, it would fly into the sky. After Silin entered the aircraft, some more sea beasts came up to the coral reefs one after another, but the feudal lords of those areas did not come out to drive them away. They only gave a warning, and then there was no movement. Unless the invaders caused too much trouble, those feudal lords would come out to fight. Other than that, they were all hiding in the caves, nervously watching everything outside. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Some fish flew out of the water with their wings outstretched. They flew from the outside of the atoll all the way to the lagoon inside the atoll. In addition to these flying fish, several small sea beasts also crawled from the outside of the atoll into the lagoon inside the atoll. The originally quiet lagoon suddenly became noisy. The enclosed lagoon provided protection for these little guys, because those sawtooth fish could not land on the coral reefs, nor could they jump or fly. With the barrier of the atoll in between, those flying fish could be considered to have escaped the hunting of the sawtooth fish. However, although these flying fish avoided the sawtooth fish, they still had to face other predators, such as Huimao, who spread its wings and flew in the air. Huimao spread its wings and hovered there, waiting for those flying fish to come to its door. It only needed to open its mouth and wait. If it did not want to eat anymore, it would deliberately stretch out its fat cat claws to hit those flying fish back to where they came from, or directly slap those flying over to where the other sea beasts were on the coral reefs. How could it not eat those that came to its door? Therefore, the sea beasts that were originally lying on the coral reefs to take refuge opened their mouths wide when they were slapped by the flying fish in front of them. Pescado and the others who were hiding in the aircraft saw this scene, and all had the same thought at the same time. This cat is really despicable. Those flying fish would probably be depressed about how they encountered this malefic existence. There were more and more sea beasts on the coral reefs, and the sawtooth fish also revealed their shadows. On the surface of the sea, elongated triangular dorsal fins emerged from the water, and some poor guys who did not have time to jump on the coral reefs, or couldn't get on the coral reefs at all, were directly torn apart and swallowed by the sawtooth fish. In addition to the sawtooth fish that were hunting for food, there were also many half-bitten or incomplete bodies that were thrown out of the water because of the sawtooth fish's biting. The originally blue seawater became even bluer. Sillin thought of that sentence again. The blue of the seawater is dyed by the blood of sea beasts. 5 minutes later, as far as the eye could see, the sea was full of those floating triangular dorsal fins, and this was only the vanguard of this school of fish. There were other members of the school behind them, and the water below the surface was also full of these ferocious guys. Huimao, who was swatting the flying fish, jumped back into the water. "What is that fat cat doing now?" Pescado asked. "It probably got bored playing in the sky and went underwater to watch the show." A pause later, Sillin said, "Turn on a monitor." After Lung turned on one of the closed monitors inside the aircraft, Sillin motioned for Cheto to connect the monitor to Huimao's data. It didn't take long for the underwater scene to appear on the monitor. This was also what Huimao saw, and it transmitted the scene back to the aircraft. The water below the atoll was a terrible battle for food. The sawtooth fish were forcing other fish and sea beasts towards the atoll. After all, there were only a few species that could climb onto the coral reefs or fly over them like the flying fish. Most of the prey were blocked by the wall of the atoll, and they had no way out because the sawtooth fish were already closing in on them. There were minced meat and scales everywhere, and the iconic big mouths and teeth of the sawtooth fish were everywhere. The color of the seawater was obviously much darker than before, and it sent chills down everyone's spine. The people inside the aircraft were staring at the terrible scene on the monitor, when the result from the detector attracted everyone's attention. "The detector has reached the seabed," someone said excitedly. From the results sent back by the detector, everyone could see a strange scene in the 3D image. It looked like a city at the bottom of the sea. Although it was just a rough outline, Lung was still very excited to see it. "That's right, the tear of God must be there. Is the video not turned on? Why isn't there any video?" Lung asked. "Young master, we've lost contact with the 3 detectors that reached the seabed." "Young master, we've also lost contact with the 4th detector." "Young master, we've also lost contact with the 5th detector." After the 5 probes sent to the coordinates reached the seabed, they lost contact with the aircraft before they could even capture a video image. Sillin recalled the things Moon had mentioned when he was talking about the Tear of God. When the Shi family was researching the Tear of God, they once lived at the bottom of the sea for a period of time in order to better understand the sea monsters. You had used the word lived, not stayed, or anything else. Connecting the dots to the blurry outline on the 3D map, Sillin thought. Did the Shi family build an underwater city at the bottom of the sea? Although it was unbelievable, this was sea paradise and not any other ordinary sea. It was already difficult for an aircraft to fly here, let alone building a city at the bottom of the sea. But the Shi family was not a family that could be judged by common sense. Perhaps it was really possible. How long until the sawtooth fish leave? Lung looked at Ingweji. Theoretically, it will take at least an hour. But if you're in a hurry, we can try to tame those sawtooth fish and let them leave earlier. Lung thought for a moment before waving his hands. Forget it. There are too many of them, and it'll take a lot of energy to go underwater. Let's save our energy for now. We're already here, so what's the harm in waiting for an hour? Sillin stared at the thoughtful Cheto and asked, "Did you find anything?" The 5 detectors lost contact with the planet's magnetic field, Cheto answered. Magnetic field? Aren't those instruments capable of resisting the planet's magnetic field? The Andryra family spent a lot of manpower and resources to build them. Lung frowned. Cheto shook his head. They can resist the planet's magnetic field, but the magnetic field is 2 to 3 times stronger at the target point. That's why the 5 instruments can't function normally. Is it their doing? Sillin asked. The them he was referring to were the Shi family members. Yes. Chapter 364. There were already a lot of sea beasts surrounding the aircraft. Fortunately, these sea beasts were focused on taking refuge, so they didn't show any hostility towards the aircraft. At most, they would scratch it with their claws out of curiosity. The hunting of the sawtooth fish lasted for an hour. When the surface of the sea gradually calmed down, these hunters didn't leave completely. The calmness of the sea did not mean that they had officially left. In the waters under the sea, there was still a large group of sawtooth fish that had stayed behind. Therefore, to see if the sawtooth fish had completely left, they just needed to look at the movements of the sea beasts that were taking refuge on the reef. Not all of these sea beasts were amphibians. Many of them could only stay on the reef for a short period of time. They would only risk leaving the water for a longer period of time when they were taking refuge. Therefore, compared to other sea beasts, these guys were the most anxious. Sillin and the others only needed to pay attention to the movements of these sea beasts. After another 10 minutes, some sea beasts began to slowly approach the water. After a few sea beasts tested the water, they suddenly plunged into the water and disappeared in a short while. Other sea beasts began to enter the water one after another. The originally crowded atoll began to become sparse, and the lords also began to expel the outsiders. Get ready to move. After the sea beasts left the atoll, Lung said, Sillin, call Whis back. We're going to the target. Huimao, who was called back by Sillin, was still a little unsatisfied. However, after flying out of the sea, it didn't immediately enter the aircraft. Instead, it found a few key spots in the previously cleared area and peed, then rubbed itself on the reef. Is this dividing territory? Pescado asked. It should be, but I'm not sure if the sea beasts will understand how cats divide territory, another person replied. Whis had tossed the dead sea beast into the sea and fed it to the sawtooth fishes. There were still some blue blood stains on the reef, but Whis didn't think that these blood stains would be enough to scare the little sea beasts away. Therefore, it left a scent here in its own way. If the sea beasts didn't know what was good for them, then it could just kill them right away. It was a very reasonable excuse. After marking the territory, Huimao entered the aircraft. Lung switched the aircraft to diving mode and entered the sea. After the aircraft entered the water, Sillin and the others officially saw the big stairs under the atoll. The stairs extended from the steep slope of the atoll all the way to the depths of the sea. The surface area of the sea still had some light shining in. Although the sea beasts in the middle area had darkened after being hunted by the sawtooth fish, they could still see various kinds of sea beasts swimming underwater. There aren't many large sea beasts in the surface area. Sometimes, the sea beasts in the middle area would come out for a walk in order to hunt. However, generally speaking, you won't encounter such large sea beasts here. The one that Whis killed was considered large in the surface area, but in the middle area was nothing. Whis would have been killed. Whis fish in the sea of the sea. Many of the things recorded in the information weren't complete. When they encountered an unfamiliar species, Lung would have his subordinates record the new species, and analyze the basic information of this sea beast together. Sillin was also able to understand quite a bit of information from their discussions. There were a lot of information that didn't necessarily require all kinds of instruments to analyze. People like Lung and the others who were very familiar with the sea could infer a large amount of information from the sea beast's external appearance and body shape when they saw a sea beast. The advantages and disadvantages of every species' evolution were clearly displayed in the eyes of Lung and the others. Perhaps this group of sea beasts had mutated in a random direction in the special magnetic field of the sea paradise, but the natural directional selection would allow the outstanding mutants to survive. Every organ, every type of body shape, always had its own reason. The deeper they went, the darker the light in the sea. However, Lung didn't have anyone turn on the aircraft's lighting equipment, but instead used night vision equipment. Here, many sea beasts were sensitive to light, and the aircraft's illumination would excite those big guys. There are a lot of ferocious-looking big guys out there, but their tempers aren't as bad as they look. They don't have much curiosity towards foreign objects, and they're only interested in familiar prey. Lung told Sillin after the spaceplane swam past a 70-meter-long sea beast. Squatting on Sillin's shoulder, Huimao smacked his lips as he watched the guy leisurely wagging its tail away on the screen. Sure enough, one couldn't judge a sea beast by its appearance alone. Perhaps it was because this area had just been cleaned up by the school of sawtooth fish, but the aircraft didn't run into any trouble when it went down. There were relatively few sea beasts that appeared. The sea beasts in the middle area were indeed huge. The few sea beasts they saw were all about 100 meters long. Some looked like jellyfish, while others had all kinds of strange shapes and sizes. Sillin looked at the display on the screen. Right now, the aircraft was already more than 2,700 meters deep. Based on the results of the previous probes, they would find something soon. Beep. Beep. As expected, the aircraft's probe equipment beeped. This is where the abnormal signal started. A subordinate said to Lung. Analyze it in depth. Lung turned on an instrument that the previous probes didn't have. The previous 5 probes hadn't been able to replicate this signal either. They had no choice but to analyze it after they got here. Very soon the results were out. It's like a signal that tells anyone who comes here where to go. The person operating the analyzer said. The person operating the scanner said, Young master, should we follow the direction of the signal? Lung didn't say anything. He shot Sillin a glance before walking towards a restroom. Sillin tossed Huimao onto Cheto's shoulder and followed Lung into the room. Inside the room, Lung closed the door and took out the star map. The glowing key on the star map was pointing in a certain direction like a needle, but that direction wasn't where the signal was pointing. What do you think? Lung asked Sillin. Just follow the star map and ignore the signal, Sillin said. Although he didn't know much about the Shi clan, from what little he knew, he felt that the signal was more like a misdirection to someone who didn't have a star chart. After staring at the star map for a while, Lung put it away. Then let's follow the directions on the star map. Although Pescado and the others didn't understand why their young master didn't follow the direction of the signal, and insisted on following the original destination, they still followed Lung's instructions. Ingweji shot a glance at Lung and Sillin before continuing with a serious expression. He knew that his young master definitely knew some crucial information, but he didn't expect that his young master wouldn't even tell him. An old man who was always by Focos's side. Instead, he was discussing it with a team leader from the hunter group. What kind of information is it? Suddenly, Ingweji's eyelids twitched. It can't be the tear of God. Right now, the temperature of the seawater was basically the same, and their surroundings were pitch black. At first, the spaceplane was able to observe their surroundings with the aid of night vision equipment. But when they were 7,000 meters below the surface, the magnetic field's interference grew stronger, and some basic equipment such as the night vision equipment started to go on strike. We're approaching the seabed, Pescado said. Earlier, they had lost contact with the detectors when they were close to the seabed, and now they were experiencing the same thing. Slow down by one more level. Be careful. Yes, young master. The display screen displayed the same blurry outline of an underwater city as the previous detectors, but it was impossible to see it clearly because the night vision equipment had gone on strike. They should be entering this underwater city by now, right? Sillin didn't pay attention to the data or the other equipment on the space plane. Instead, he paid attention to Huimao's ears. This guy's ears were much more useful than the equipment Lung and the others were using. Lying on top of Cheto's body, Huimao's eyes were closed, its tail was wagging slowly, and its ears were twitching ever so slightly. Suddenly, Huimao's ears twitched once before it opened its eyes and patted Cheto with its paw. Then it looked at Sillin and said, "We're here." Lung and the others looked at Huimao and were about to ask him something when all the lights inside the spaceplane suddenly went out. Even the analysis equipment inside the spaceplane had stopped working. Lung took out the backup lights. They weren't electrical lights, but natural fluorescent stones. Although they couldn't compare to the lighting system, they could still brighten up the spaceplane a little. "Young master, the thrusters have stopped working, and all the equipment can't be activated. The spaceplane is falling right now," Pescado said. Bang! Bang! A moment later, the spaceplane came to a stop. "We've reached the seabed. What do we do, young master?" Lung looked at the equipment in his hand. The equipment the Andryra family had made for Sea Paradise was basically dead. They could only rely on themselves now. "Let's go out and take a look," Lung said. There was no point in staying inside the spaceplane. Since the spaceplane couldn't be activated, they would only be waiting for death. Maybe some undersea overlord would come over and step on them, and they wouldn't even know what it was that stepped on them. "Young master, it's pitch black outside right now, and we can't just take out our lights. You know that there are a lot of big things at the bottom of the sea," a subordinate said. "We won't get out of here if we play it safe. We can only take risks. Let's go." While saying this, Lung walked to the buffer cabin and put on his protective suit. The others also checked their protective suits and equipment. After they were ready, Ingweji stood in front of Lung and shielded him. The cabin door opened and seawater poured in. Without the spaceplane's pressure balancing function, everyone could clearly feel the pressure even though they were wearing anti-pressure protective suits. The first communicator inside the protective suit had stopped working, and the second communicator only had an effective range of 100 meters. Therefore, they couldn't split up too much. Huimao swung his 4 fat legs and swayed around Sillin like he was floating. "His perception has weakened," Huimao said. However, even if his perception had weakened, it was still better than Lung's equipment. Lung took out a cannon-shaped object and pointed it at the sky. Bang bang bang. After a few consecutive sounds, lights appeared from the seawater above them. They were all fluorescent spheres, but they were wrapped in a layer of outer shell, allowing them to float in the air. With the illumination of these fluorescent spheres, they could clearly see their surroundings. Although the light seemed insignificant in this kind of sea, their eyesight was enough to capture the scene nearby. In front of them, a huge mouth filled with sharp teeth appeared. Even if Sillin and the others stacked together, they might not be as big as one of the teeth in this huge mouth. Its appearance gave them a fright. The hair on Huimao's back stood on end, and he almost transformed right away. However, they soon realized that this huge mouth was still, and it was trapped inside by something. Shifting their gazes to the side, they could see the owner of this huge mouth. Without a doubt, this was a giant beast that lived at the bottom of the sea. Its gigantic head, its gigantic body that was submerged in the darkness, and the reflection of some crystals made everything look incredibly strange. The so-called skyscrapers, that Sillin and the others thought of as undersea city, were actually mountains of transparent crystals. No, to be more precise, they were all specimens. Sea beast specimens. These mountain-like crystals were nothing more than sealing these sea beasts inside, sealing away the once living side of these giant deep-sea beasts. Other than the giant beast specimen in front of them, there were also other giant beast specimens of different species around it. Some of the giant beasts sealed inside the crystals were lying on their sides, some were standing, and some were crawling just like the giant beast in front of them. Standing here, Sillin and the others felt like they were as small as a speck of dust. Moreover, the faint shadows of Sillin and the others were reflected inside the crystals. When they overlapped with the giant beasts inside the crystals, it added a frightening chill to everything. How on earth were these giant crystal mountain sea beast specimens made? The Shi family? Cheto, who wasn't wearing a protective suit, reached out and touched the crystals. After sensing them for a moment, he said, "These crystals have existed for 1,000 years." 1,000 years? Lung and the others were speechless. Who on earth had the ability to seal these giant sea beasts inside crystals in such a harsh environment 1,000 years ago? Sillin observed the giant beasts from 1,000 years ago sealed inside the crystal. The creatures inside the crystal were vivid and lifelike, and they were slightly different from the few recorded sea beasts. It could be seen that they were the same species 1,000 years ago, but after 1,000 years, the original species had mutated, and their appearance had changed a little, causing the contrast between the two. This was also due to the special environment of sea heaven. The mutation rate of the sea beasts living in sea heaven was very high, and 1,000 years was enough to cause a lot of changes in many species. "What do we do next, young master?" Pescado asked. Lung thought for a moment, and took out the star map. The light of the key appeared and pointed to a certain direction. When Lung took out the star map, Ingweji, who was in a highly nervous state because of the giant beast specimens in front of him, started breathing heavily. The tear of God. It really is the tear of God. No wonder the young master's behavior was so abnormal. And no wonder he didn't act according to the plan. He had the tear of God's star map. Ingweji looked at Sillin. He was sure that Sillin was the one who gave the other star map fragment to Lung. He didn't think that a lousy captain of a hunter squad would have a star map, and more importantly, he was willing to take out the star map fragment. Ingweji wasn't the only one who recognized the star map. The others were familiar with the Lillo's star map as well. After all, they were all people who followed Lung or Focus around, so it was only natural that they knew some secrets. Their hearts that were originally unsettled because of the giant beast specimens quickly calmed down. For the sake of the tear of God. Even if they all died here, they would still help the young master find the tear of God. "Let's go." Lung pointed at the direction indicated by the star map and started walking. Sillin took 2 steps and saw that Huimao wasn't following him. He turned his head and saw that the guy was lying on top of the seal of the giant beast specimen and was about to take a bite. The corner of Sillin's mouth twitched. He raised his hand and grabbed the hair on the back of Huimao's neck and pulled him over. "You won't even let go of a sea beast that has been dead for thousands of years?" Sillin let go of his hand and patted Huimao's head, indicating that Huimao should follow him obediently. The group walked for almost an hour in the mountain of specimens, but they didn't find any other giant beasts. There weren't any living giant beasts in the surrounding area either. However, the detectors that were sent over earlier did find 2 of them. Could it be that those big guys aren't nearby? Pescado looked around and said. As soon as Pescado said this, the person next to him patted his head hard. "Do you want to meet one?" Pescado shook his head. "Not even if you beat me to death." The group followed the direction indicated by the star map and continued to walk forward. They arrived in front of a small protruding hill. This hill wasn't a mountain of crystals. It looked more like it was formed by a protrusion of the seabed's crust. The star map was pointing to this small mountain. The few of them walked around the small mountain and found a closed door in one place. Lung approached with the star map. As he got closer, the light of the key on the star map became brighter. The door opened. The key on the star map was the key to open this door. There should be a large empty space behind the door. After it was opened, seawater gushed in. Sillin and Ingweji grabbed Lung, who was almost sucked in. When the seawater finally calmed down, the group walked in. Under the illumination of the fluorescent stone, the empty space behind the door was also revealed. There was nothing unusual. There was nothing else in the 300 square meters space. After the group entered the door automatically closed again. The strange thing was that after the door closed, the seawater in this space was gradually drawn away. A circular opening opened in the middle of the space. A staircase extended from the ground to the top, connecting with an opening in the ceiling above Sillin's head. Ingweji took the lead and stepped on the staircase. The group followed behind him. After Ingweji entered the second level, the lighting inside was turned on, showing the scene inside the second level. On the walls of this space, Sillin saw some murals. It was the handwriting of the Shi family from 1,000 years ago. Chapter 365. There were many things drawn on the wall, including sea beasts and abstract people. The one thing that convinced Sillin that it was the work of the Shi family was the chessboard on the wall. Those who hadn't seen the Chain Stars chessboard would only be confused when they saw the dots of different sizes on the wall, but Sillin had seen Shi Mu's Chain Stars chessboard before. Judging from the chessboard on the wall, this was at least the 7th layer of the chessboard. There was a circular platform on the 2nd floor with a groove in the center. Judging from its size and shape, it was the same as the Olillo's star map fragment. Under the guidance of the others, Lung closed the star map in his hand and placed the Olillo's star map fragment inside. Crack, crack, crack. The circular platform began to rotate, one ring after another, in different directions. Some were clockwise, some were counterclockwise, and the angle of rotation was also different. In the end, when the 9 rings in the circular platform stopped rotating, a painting appeared on the circular platform. It was a sea beast. It looked like an amphibious reptile. However, both Lung and Ingweji said that this sea beast lived in the depths of the ocean. Sillin didn't know how they came to this conclusion, but he trusted Lung and Ingweji's opinion. Andryra's data didn't contain any information about this sea beast. They didn't see it on their way down either. What is it trying to express? Lung asked as he looked at the circular platform. Sillin glanced at Hui Mao. The guy's ears were twitching again, but before he could ask anything, a violent tremor interrupted him. What's going on? Is it an earthquake? While they were still in shock, a screen appeared on the circular wall on the 2nd floor. The screen showed the scene outside. At this moment, outside the small mountain, buildings began to rise. They were not sea beast crystal specimens, but real buildings. The surface of the seabed's crust glowed with light, like a road paved in the middle of the rising city. There's really an underwater city. Everyone was shocked by what they saw on the screen. To be able to build a city at the bottom of sea paradise, what kind of ability did one have? As the hemispherical buildings rose, a layer of membrane-like cover spread out from the center of the city, expelling the seawater and making the buried city appear more real. The light barrier spread far and wide, forming a hemispherical shape that covered the area. When everything calmed down once more, the breathing of the people on the 2nd floor of the small mountain began to quicken, especially Lung and the others. It was precisely because they understood the ocean and understood life in the ocean that they knew how difficult it was to achieve such a feat. Perhaps it would be simple in other places, but this was sea heaven. There were countless sea beasts, special magnetic fields, terrible environments, and disruptive substances. Of course, this also made them believe that the tear of God was definitely here. Let's go. Lung took the lead and walked downstairs. Ingweji and the others followed. Sillin looked at Hui Mao, whose ears were perked up from time to time, and asked, "What did you find?" "I don't know. I keep feeling like there's something around here, but my perception has decreased here. I'm not sure what it is," Hui Mao answered. "Machine." "No, it's some kind of living creature. It's alive." While saying this, Whis clenched its paws and opened and closed its paws. "There's a very large mechanical structure underground," Cheto said while looking around. "And the energy supply here should be geothermal energy." Sillin didn't doubt Cheto's analysis. At the same time, he admired the Shi family's abilities even more. They really were the peak generation that even the gods were jealous of. "Let's go and take a look." By the time Sillin, Cheto and Hui Mao walked out of the small mountain, Lung and the others had already taken off their breathing masks. The air composition here is almost the same as the air at sea. Even the pressure is the same, Lung said to Sillin. Now that they were illuminated from the ground, they didn't need the fluorescent stones anymore. The place was much brighter than before, and they could see everything clearly. It should be possible. There must be a way to control the air composition and pressure here, Sillin said while looking at the buildings rising from the ground. These buildings were of different sizes, but they were all hemispherical in shape. Moreover, they looked like ordinary stones that weren't transparent. They couldn't see inside or find an entrance. Lung wanted to find the tear of God, but he didn't know where to start. The buildings looked the same, and he couldn't cut them with a knife. At best, he could leave a few shallow scratches. Sillin took off his breathing mask and protective suit. Then he touched a hemispherical building with his finger. This building contains DH50 black ore. Sillin said while feeling the information transmitted to his fingertip. He couldn't help but marvel at the similar buildings around him. To think that they could use so much of such rare DH50 black ore. It was obvious that Sea Heaven had a lot of DH50. The machines inside are moving, Cheto said. He could sense the machines inside the hemispherical buildings clearly. Sillin had obviously sensed it when he touched the buildings just now. These buildings are just like houses and skyscrapers. There must be an entrance somewhere. I can't help but feel that since the creator built a city here, it wouldn't just look like this. Young master, come over here. Not far away, Ingweji called out to Lung in a low voice. There was urgency and anxiety in his voice. Sillin didn't move from his spot. Huimao's claws on his shoulder were retracting subconsciously again. Every time Huimao acted like this, it meant that he had sensed the presence of prey. Lung walked over and saw something. Suddenly, he turned around and looked around before fixing his gaze on Sillin. Sillin, watch out. The moment Lung said the first word, Sillin felt something pouncing at him from behind. It was so fast that it was almost impossible to detect its presence. In fact, it was as if it were a shadow. Before Sillin could move, Huimao was about to extend his claws, and Cheto was ready to fight. However, the thing suddenly stopped 5 meters away from Sillin. It made a few rustling noises, but it didn't charge at him. Sillin saw the thing's appearance clearly now. It was about 15 meters long, had 4 limbs and a long tail. Its body was almost black, and it didn't have any scales. However, it gave off a tough and impenetrable feeling. Its eyes were the same color as the sea, and it had no pupils. However, its emotions could be seen from the depths of its eyes. There were folds of skin around their necks, and when they pounced at Cheto, their skin folds would shrink tightly against their necks. However, the black fellow in front of them had spread open like an umbrella. It was a very strange species. Marauders. Lung and the others took out their weapons. Energy guns weren't very useful in this place, so they could only use bullets. They also took out their blades. The Andryra family would send an expedition team to Sea Paradise every couple of years or decades. Of course, they wouldn't go deep into the sea like Lung did this time. Sometimes, they would only observe from near the surface or in the air. However, the expedition team had only captured an image of this creature once in the past few years. They hadn't seen it again after that. They were incredibly fast, and the only time they captured an image was when 3 of them forced a middle sea beast out of the sea and killed it. The claws of the predator were far sharper than they looked, and with their advantage in speed, they could easily kill a creature that was nearly 100 times larger than them. And the prey couldn't even touch the predator. Only the core members of the Andryra family had seen images of the marauders back then. Lung and Ingweji were the only ones who had seen the images. The rest of them hadn't. Ingweji had seen a faint claw mark on the wall of a building just now. It was very similar to the claw marks of the marauders in his memory. That was why he was so anxious. The group of people who had captured the marauders tried to tame them, but they didn't even bat an eyelid, and continued to hunt the large sea beast. After Lung saw the claw mark, he began to pay attention to his surroundings. They had the advantage of being human, so they were much more sensitive to aquatic creatures than other races. When he sensed that there was a marauder behind Sillin, Lung hurriedly called out to warn them. However, neither Lung nor Ingweji had expected such a scene to occur. Why did the marauders stop? Lung asked Ingweji in a low voice. They didn't dare move recklessly, and they didn't dare to move too much either. That would make the marauders feel threatened and go berserk. That would be even harder to deal with. Ingweji didn't understand either. According to the Andryra family's records of the marauders, they were all very cruel. Once they started killing, they wouldn't stop until their prey was dead. According to the Andryra family's analysis, the marauders probably didn't have any natural enemies in this world. Regardless of whether their speculation was correct or not, they were all very curious as to why the marauder had suddenly stopped when it was clearly charging at them. Sillin patted Huimao, who was itching for action, and told him to hold back for now. After observing the black fellow not far away from him for a moment, Sillin suddenly thought of something, and took out the gray cat's incredibly precious leather ball. Meow, Silin. Why did you take out my ball? Huimao hurriedly reached out to protect the ball. It was impossible to find a ball like this in the entire League of Stars, and it was extremely rare even in the Miss Bodhisattva sect. After all, no one would go and ask that giant viper to make another one, right? Let go, I'm just doing an experiment. If you don't let go, what if that black fellow scratches it? Silin noticed that the marauder in front of him had become even more vigilant as he watched Huimao protect the ball with its claws. Silin pulled at the ball in his hand and saw that it wouldn't budge, so he said to Huimao, "Why don't you play around here? That black fellow seems to be afraid of that 1,000-year-old viper's skin." Huimao flicked its ears and looked at the marauder that was baring its teeth and opening and closing the folds of its skin on its neck. It looked at them warily and hooked the ball with its claws. After it hit the building, Huimao jumped up and firmly hooked the ball with its tail. During this process, the marauder in Lung's mouth moved its gaze along with the ball. It even took a few steps back and growled warily when the ball was thrown. Lung and the others finally realized what was going on. Ingweiji shot Lung a look. "What's that thing in that kid's hand?" "Lung, I don't know either." While everyone was paying attention to the marauder, Cheto moved around to the back of a building in a flash. While Cheto was moving, another black shadow flashed around the building. It was another marauder. "Oh, wait. We mean no harm. Don't kill me or it." A strange voice came from behind the building. It definitely wasn't Cheto's voice. "There's someone else?" Lung motioned for the others to go over and take a look. The marauder in front of Silin gave up on Silin the moment it heard the voice. It flashed and charged over. When Silin walked over, Lung, Ingweiji, and the others were looking at Cheto strangely. Cheto was holding a person in his hand. He didn't look like a normal human, but he did look a lot like one. There was a marauder on each side of him. They were staring at Cheto like a tiger watching its prey. As for Cheto, a marauder was biting him from head to toe all the way to his abdomen. Cheto's outstretched arm was blocking the bite, so the marauder couldn't swallow him any further. The person Cheto was holding slapped the head of the marauder holding Cheto and urged, let go now." The marauder let out a few rustles of dissatisfaction before letting go and retreating to the person's side. Cheto's upper body was finally exposed, and there were teeth holes all the way from his abdomen to his head. Just how many rows of teeth did a marauder have in its mouth? It was as if a two-sided needleboard had clamped down on Cheto's head. Ingweiji and the others quickly discovered that there was no blood on Cheto at all. The holes on Lung's body quickly closed and returned to their original state under the group's wide-eyed gazes. It was as if the person who was almost swallowed just now wasn't him. "Who are you?" Silin asked. The person scratched his finger-thick hair with a webbed hand and said a little bashfully, "My name is Korea. Everyone calls me Sai." His one sentence revealed a lot of information. This person knew the common language of the League of Stars, and his tone carried a Sector H dialect. Secondly, he said everyone, meaning that there were other people here besides him. Thirdly, this person and his accomplices were very likely residents of this underwater city, and they were very familiar with the marauders. Seeing that Silin and the others didn't react, Korea said a little vexedly, "I really didn't do it on purpose. I was just curious." Silin motioned for Cheto to put Korea down before saying, "We mean no harm. You can have your companions put down their weapons now." Lung also motioned for his subordinates to put down their weapons. Korea looked at Silin and then at the others. Then he scratched his webbed right hand with his left hand, thought for a moment and waved at the buildings. Not long after, the buildings were no longer the monotonous hemispherical shape they were before. Some parts of the buildings had become transparent like windows, and there were a few people who looked similar to Korea lying on the ground next to the windows. They were all armed. The person lying on the window of one of the buildings shouted at them, Sai, ask them if they are intruders without keys. If they are, ask the guards to kill them." Silin and the others. Didn't he find it strange that Bright Truth would shout something like this? Korea turned to look at Silin and the others. About that, are you intruders without keys?" Lung covered his face. Are the creatures here really so intelligent? After adjusting his emotions, Lung answered, I brought the key here. It's right there. Lung pointed at the direction of the hill. I couldn't have turned this place into this without the key. You guys were living underground before this, right? Korea nodded hurriedly and said excitedly, Yes, we were living underground before this. I heard that this is the first time this city has risen up since it retracted into the ground. Hey, they really did bring the key here. Korea waved at the buildings and shouted. After receiving confirmation, a door opened on the hemispherical buildings, and the people inside walked out. Most of them looked young. There was expectation in their eyes, as if they were looking forward to something. After these people walked out, a couple of predators ran over to them. These people seemed to be very familiar with the predators. Looking at the ferocious fellows wagging their tails like pet dogs, Lung felt a sense of absurdity. He always thought that no one could tame a high-level sea beast that tamers couldn't. But what was up with these people? Lung shook his head and looked at Cheto. He pinched him curiously and elbowed him. How did it feel to be half-eaten by a predator just now? Cheto thought for a moment before answering, bad breath. Lung. That was a pretty good experience. While Sillin and the others were thinking about what to do next, the people who were approaching them parted to make a path for them. An old man of the same race as Korea ran over with a bottle in his hand. The bottle made Lung's heart beat faster unconsciously. Could it be? The old man ran over and looked at Sillin and the others. Then his gaze stopped on Lung and the others. Are you looking for the Tear of Gods? Yes. Lung was a little confused by the direct question. Who wants the Tear of Gods? Me. Lung pointed at himself. Here. The old man passed the bottle to Lung and looked at him expectantly. Drink it. This is the Tear of Gods. Ingweiji and the others looked at the old man suspiciously, but at the same time, they also felt that the thing in the bottle seemed to be communicating with them. There was a sense of intimacy, just like how they communicated with sea beasts after they tamed them. Lung stopped Ingweiji from inspecting the bottle and accepted it. He said to the old man, I heard that the Tear of Gods grants its user the ability to reform sea beasts. Yes, that is true. But I also heard that those who use the Tear of Gods only have a certain chance of success. Yes, that is true. What if they fail? The old man smiled kindly. They will die. Lung. Chapter 366. Lung didn't drink the contents of the bottle immediately. Even if the contents were extremely tempting, he couldn't act rashly until he understood the situation. Who were these people? Why did they live in this underwater city? Everything was still up in the air. Sillin looked at the people around him, and the people who were leaning against the windows of other buildings and looking at them. There were almost 300 people who had shown themselves already. The city was huge, but the population was far too sparse compared to its size. What's your relationship with the Shi family? Sillin asked. The old man was originally a little anxious because Lung did not drink the bottle, but when he heard Sillin's words, the old man's expression froze. It wasn't just the old man. Even the group of onlookers around them revealed surprised expressions. Sillin didn't tell Lung too much about the Shi family. He only mentioned that Olilla was somewhat related to the Shi family, and Lung's subordinates. Even Ingweiji, who had served Andriophokos for a long time, didn't know much about them. Now that Sillin had mentioned it, he was a little curious. After a moment of surprise, the old man looked respectful. It wasn't towards Sillin, but towards the Shi family that Sillin mentioned. The Shi family is our benefactor. Benefactor? Yes. If it wasn't for the Shi family's help, our ancestors might not have survived that disaster 1,000 years ago, and we wouldn't be here today. The eyes of the old man, and the people around him were more like those of believers. Lung suddenly thought of something and asked, May I know your surname? We don't have a surname, but we can be called Mill if we really have to. Mill. Ingweiji, Pescado and the others' jaws almost hit the ground when they heard this. The Mill family. The Mill family that only existed in historical records could be found, but no more information could be found. The Mill family that only existed in legends was said by critics to be a combination of genius and idiot. Sillin had learned a little about the Mill family from the books he read about Sector H's history. The Mill family could be considered an ancient family of Sector H. Moreover, every member of this family was an excellent trainer. They didn't even need special training. Some of the children of the Mill family could already play with the huge sea monsters in the sea before they could even run. Now, many people did not believe that the race had that kind of ability. After all, those things only existed in legends. Moreover, there was no video or graphic evidence. Those evidence had disappeared with the extinction of the Mill family 1,000 years ago. However, Lung and the others had always believed in it. In some of the internal records of the Andryra family, some of the matters regarding the Mir family had been personally written by Andryra's ancestors back then. Because of that, when Lung heard that these people were from the Mill family, he was quite astonished. According to the records of Andryra's ancestors, Mill wasn't their surname, but the name of their race. According to the ancient language of the race, Mill meant sea. The Mill family belonged to a special race among the natives of Sector H. Their minds were pure and stubborn. Their one-track-minded nature caused them to offend a lot of people. Just like the critics said, this race was a combination of genius and idiot. Their talent allowed them to communicate with the sea monsters almost unimpeded, but they also made mistakes every once in a while and offended a lot of people unintentionally. They didn't know how to curry favor with those in power, they didn't know how to be reserved, and they didn't know how to read people's expressions. They were like an anomaly among the human race, and the reason they were wiped out 1,000 years ago was because they accidentally offended someone and were forced into space. From the looks of it now, the Mill family wasn't completely wiped out back then. Some of them were saved by the Shi family. At the same time, a lot of evidence and deeds of the Mill family had been erased by the peak generation of the Shi family. Lung and the others looked carefully at the people around them. To think that the people who were confirmed to be wiped out 1,000 years ago were hiding in such an unimaginable place. Seeing that more and more people were walking towards them, Sillin suggested, "Let's find a place to talk." Yes, we should find a place to talk." After saying that, the old man turned around and left. He did not even say the word please. Nor did he make a gesture for Celine and the others to follow him. He simply turned around and left on his own. After walking a few steps, the old man turned around and said in dissatisfaction, "Why don't you follow me?" Lung tilted his chin at them and told them to follow him. You can't look at the Mill people from the perspective of a normal person. The old man led Celine and the others into a hemispherical building. The furnishings inside were very simple, and most of them were made of stone. They were extremely rare stone ores, no less. After entering through the door and passing through the living room, Huimao, who was crouching on Celine's shoulder, saw a couple of ores that were extremely expensive in the League of Stars. He wanted nothing more than to rush forward and gather them all into his arms. They were all fish biscuits. So many fish biscuits. The layout was simple and could even be described as monotonous, but the technology behind it was amazing. How could they not be amazed that Sea Heaven was able to use intelligent automation technology? Moreover, this was 1,000 years ago. With the Mill people's talent in electronics, there was no way they could have made something like this. Inside the old man's living room, Celine and the others roughly understood the cause and effect of the incident. Back then, the Shi family wanted to research sea beasts and trainers, so they came to Sector H in search of research subjects and a suitable environment. Coincidentally, they ran into the Mill people who were being wiped out at the time, and the total number of Mill people they saved at the time was less than 30. Although the population of this race wasn't large to begin with, the abrupt drop from hundreds to less than 30 was a devastating blow. The Shi clan helped the Mi, people take revenge by bringing their enemies to Sea Heaven, letting the Mi, people deal with the culprits who had almost caused their entire clan to be exterminated. In the end, the Mill people who survived made their enemies fall into the stomachs of sea beasts. After that, the Shi family began to build an underwater city here. They invented anti-interference technology, but it was only partially anti-interference. Building a city like this under the sea was already their limit, and they couldn't incorporate any more technology into this place. The special environment here caused most technology to be rejected. Fortunately, the underwater city was built successfully, and the Shi family's research was successfully completed. After that, the Shi family left this underwater world to the mill people. However, in order to repay the debt of gratitude, the newly elected chief of the Mere people promised to guard this place with his people until the Tear of God was found. Only when the Tear of God welcomed its next master would the mill people leave this underwater city. They were willing to be the guards of the Tear of God. This guard lasted for 1,000 years. They stayed at the bottom of the sea and befriended the predators that Lung mentioned. These sea beasts didn't actually leave the deep sea area, but for the sake of the mill people, they would go to the surface and bring some souvenirs, allowing the mill people to come into contact with the surface of the sea and the things on the surface. The old man pointed at the bottle in Lung's hand and said, "Now that you're here, we can rest assured after you consume the Tear of God and successfully evolve." "You didn't use this?" Lung asked. "No," the old man said matter-of-factly. "It wasn't prepared for us anyway." Pescado and the others had a strange look on their faces. As expected, the mill people were just like the legends said. They really didn't know what to say about them. If it was anyone else, they would have drunk the Tear of God 800 years ago. No, perhaps as soon as the Shi family left. "You guys, don't you have any thoughts? This is the Tear of God. The Tear of God." Pescado emphasized. The old man was a little angry. He felt that Pescado was looking down on his intelligence. He unhappily patted the table that was worth a whole aircraft's worth of fish biscuits in Huemao's eyes. "I know. Our clan has guarded it for nearly 1,000 years. As the current clan leader and the person who inherited the Tear of God, do you think I don't know better than you?" "You know nothing." Pescado and the others cursed silently. The Tear of God. There was a passage in the creation myth that said, when the Tear of God fell into the sea, the creatures in the sea were influenced and offered their loyalty. That was a treasure that could control countless sea beasts, including those overlords in the sea. What a treasure! How could these people not have any thoughts? It was fine if it was just one person, but this was an entire clan that had lived for generations until now. Were their brains filled with shit from constipation? How could it make people feel so anxious? Cough. Lung patted the uncontrollable twitch on his face. He couldn't blame them. As a businessman, he couldn't imagine the combination of nerves in the brains of the Mere people. In order not to dwell on this problem, Lung asked, "Mr. Chief, in the records of my ancestors, you Mere people don't seem to look like this." "Oh, this, of course it's a mutation. The natural environment of the sea paradise has greatly increased the mutation rate. There will be some changes in almost every generation." Chief Mere raised his hand and moved his webbed fingers. As he moved his fingers, the webbing on his hand gradually shrunk. Other parts of his hand also changed. Soon, Chief Mere's hand looked similar to the fingers of adults like Sillin and the others. Back then, the Mere people didn't have webbing on their hands. However, after living here for nearly 1,000 years, the Mere people had mutated from generation to generation, and there were many changes. It wasn't just the webbing on their hands. There were also many differences in their thick hair, body shape, and bone structure. These were all due to mutation. So after 1,000 years, we are slightly different from our ancestors. Chief Mere had a smug look on his face. Pescado and the others lowered their heads so that Chief Mere wouldn't see their twitching expressions. What was there to be smug about? What was there to be smug about after staying here for 1,000 years? However, Chief Mere's expression became a little sad again. The birth rate of our Mere people has dropped a lot. After so many generations, there are only 476 people now. After a moment of silence, Lung shook the bottle in his hand. "Is this all there is of the Tear of God?" Yes. This is all there is, and it's only enough for one person," Chief Mere answered. Sillin realized that Chief Mere liked to say the word yes. Was this an affirmation of the double superposition table? Just as Lung was feeling a little regretful, Chief Mere continued. "The mutation caused by the Tear of God is a hereditary mutation. However, there is a certain probability. If your mutation is successful, some of your descendants might inherit this mutation, or they might not. As long as there was a probability of inheriting it, Lung felt much better. I would also like to ask, what is the probability of successful mutation after consuming the tear of God? Chief Mir thought for a moment. As far as I know, according to the current records, it's 100%. Hearing that it was 100%, Ingweji, Pescado, and the others heaved a sigh of relief. However, before they could catch their breaths, Chief Mir scratched his webbed hand and said, "Back then, only one person from the Shi family used it, and he succeeded. If that's the case, it's indeed 100%. Ingweji and the others. What kind of 100% is this? Seriously. Continue to be anxious. Oh, there's one more thing I need to tell you. There's only one way for you to get out. Even the Shi family used that method to get out." What method? The few of them unconsciously sat up straight. Chief Mir calmly played with his white hair that was as thick as a finger. We'll have to wait until he successfully evolves. Everyone. This was really making them anxious. No wonder so many people wanted to kill the Mir people back then. Back then, when the Shi family researched the common frequency, they discovered that even if it's the same wavelength, mechanical instruments can't achieve the same effect as humans. That's why I said that there's only one way for you to get out of the sea. Forget it, I've said enough. Our entire family is looking forward to your successful mutation. Ingweji's serious expression had been broken countless times today. He still had many things that he didn't understand, but this damned old man in front of him said that he had said enough. 10 minutes later, Lung prepared himself mentally and drank the tear of God in the bottle. Then he collapsed. The old man said that it was a normal phenomenon, and even took out a manual from 1,000 years ago. The manual listed the phenomenon of successful mutation, as well as the various scenarios of failure. Ingweji's hands were trembling as he held onto the instruction manual. The signs of failure were simply too frightening. There wasn't even a complete corpse. Ingweji didn't dare to imagine what kind of shock the entire Andrea family would experience if his young master failed. Long was waiting at the old man's house. According to Silin's observation, Long's body temperature rose and fell drastically, and he looked like he was in pain, but there were obvious signs of life. It should be a good sign. An hour later, Long's fluctuating body temperature stabilized, but he still didn't wake up. According to the manual, he was undergoing an advantageous mutation, not one of those scenarios of failure. This allowed everyone's tense nerves to finally relax. Ingweji and the others waited at the old man's house for their young master to wake up. Huimao couldn't stay idle, and wanted to go out for a stroll. Silin was worried about him, so he asked Cheto to stay and observe Long's situation. Then he left the old man's house with Huimao. Silin took out a bag of biscuits for Huimao to grind his teeth, and walked inside this underwater city. This was a very simple city, and it was inhabited by people with simple minds. Even the dark blue sea water of the sea paradise that struck fear into people's hearts was pure and clear to them. Wasn't it? The Mir people lived their lives simply and resolutely. They guarded that bottle of God's tear with pure hearts, but at the same time, they had a hazy yearning for the life outside the sea that every generation had spoken of. This yearning reached its peak after Silin's group arrived. However, even if they yearned for it, they still kept the determination in their hearts and willingly guarded this place until the person who obtained the God's tear appeared. There was no doubt that the Mir people were absolute geniuses when it came to taming sea beasts. They were even more talented than Long and the others. However, they couldn't escape the misfortune brought about by their own shortcomings. Even though they were a member of the human race, they couldn't integrate into human society. Under the accumulation of contradictions, the extinction of their race suddenly came. Even the strongest tamer couldn't come into contact with the sea creatures and the spirituality of the sea when they were in outer space. In a situation where their attack power was already reduced, and they possessed relatively backward technology and martial strength, how could they fight against others? Protectors. The Mir people needed a protector. In the past, it was the Shi family. After today, perhaps, the Andrira family would take over this task. However, the Andrira family was a merchant family. Even if Long sincerely protected this family, what about in the future? What about the rest of the Andrira family? Silin raised his head. The light barrier above the city isolated the water. The undersea city rippled with light and shadow, bringing with it a deep and ancient poetic feeling. Hey, isn't that the fellow called Sai Sai? Huimao raised his claw and patted Silen's face, pointing in a direction. Silen looked over and saw that Celia was brushing the tongue of a marauder. The marauder was lying there obediently with its tongue sticking out, and Celia was using a brush that was even bigger than a mop to brush its tongue. The marauder was so comfortable that it was squinting its eyes in satisfaction. Could it be that all sea beasts like to brush their tongues? Silen remembered that Blue Skin seemed to have this hobby as well. Seeing Silen, Sai Sai became excited. The brush poked into a certain part of the sea beast's mouth. Discontentedly, it used its tongue to roll up the big brush and used the other end to hit Sai Sai's head, causing Sai Sai to jump left and right to avoid it. Although he was throwing a little tantrum, this way of getting along was really harmonious. Huimao used his claw to pick up a few fish biscuits and threw them into the sea beast's mouth. He also threw a few to Sai Sai and said generously, "I'll treat you guys to some fish biscuits." It was just a few pieces of fish biscuits. To that big sea beast, it probably couldn't even taste them. However, Sai Sai liked it very much. Looking at Sai Sai, who was eating happily, Silen was really embarrassed to tell him that it was just pet cat food. You guys have a good relationship. Very few humans and sea beasts can get along like this, Silen said. Even if it was a tamer, they would mostly use sea beasts as a kind of weapon. They wouldn't get along like Sai Sai and the others. Sai Sai bit the fish biscuit and said incoherently, "Because we see ourselves as one of these sea beasts. We're all friends." As he said this, he looked at Huimao again, because the fish biscuits Huimao gave him had already been eaten. Chapter 367. Seeing that Celia was looking at the bag of fish biscuits she was holding in her arms, Huimao clenched his fists tightly. He had a conflicted look on his face, but in the end, he still opened the bag and gave some to Celia. As for the big sea beast, it did not taste the fish biscuits at all. It was not the least bit interested in the fish biscuits in Huimao's hands. It was now playing with a big brush with its tongue. Celia stretched out her webbing to make it easier for her to hold the fish biscuits. Looking at Celia, who was eating happily, Silen asked, "Celia, have you been living underground all this time? Before we came here, this city had never risen?" "That's true." Celia chewed on the fish biscuit in her mouth and replied, "According to the records, my ancestors and I have always lived in the underground city. Only when the key appears can the city rise again. So for thousands of years, we have been living underground. Sometimes, when we are bored, we will come out and take a stroll around the city." "Swim around? Do we need to wear protective clothing or something like that when we come out to swim?" Silen asked. "What do you need to wear to swim? Isn't it just walking out of the house and playing around for a while before going home? What's a protective suit?" Celia was confused. "Nothing, it's just a swimming suit worn by ordinary people. Can you mill people come out to swim directly? Can you swim freely at the bottom of the sea?" Celia stuffed all the fish biscuits into her mouth, then scratched her hand and said, "I heard that in the beginning, we could not. We could only stay in the city's defense circle. The later generation could go out to swim, but they did not stay outside for long. Finally, when it came to our generation, we could almost swim freely outside." Silen was a little surprised. It seemed that the mill people did not stay in the sea for 1,000 years for nothing. The beneficial mutation of their bodies made them more suitable for living in the deep sea. "Since you can come out to swim, where have you been? There should be a lot of giant beasts at the bottom of the sea, just like those sea beasts that I have seen sealed in crystals. Aren't you afraid? This city will emit a sound wave that humans can't hear. Those giant beasts are more sensitive to this sound wave, so they won't approach this area." Korea recited the passage from his memory as if he was reciting a book. He did not know anything about sound waves or sensitivity. All he could do was to recite the passage. Silen raised his head and looked outside the light shield. Just now, there was a big sea beast swimming past the light shield, but it didn't continue to approach this place. This was probably the reason why the sea beasts had retreated when Cheto was talking about. At the same time, Silen also learned from Cheto's analysis that there were other reasons that paralyzed the spaceplane they were on. This was probably what the Shi family had done to prevent the aliens from coming here to cause trouble. Yes, because of this, we didn't dare to go too far. In addition, there's a trench next to the city. It's very dangerous there, so the elders didn't allow us to go near it. As for those sea beasts sealed in crystals, I heard that they came to cause trouble when the city was being built, so they were sealed inside by our benefactors. Cheto's eyes were filled with admiration when he talked about the sealed sea beasts. The crystals weren't enclosed inside the light shield, so they weren't considered part of this underwater city. That being said, it was extremely difficult for the Shi family to achieve this. They must have used some special methods. Judging from Cheto's expression, he probably didn't know how the giant sea beasts were sealed inside the crystals in the first place. Sillin thinks for a moment before asking, "Where's the trench you mentioned?" "Here, it's over there. It's next to the protective shield." Sillin asked Cheto to lead the way. He wanted to go there and take a look in exchange for a batch of fish biscuits. Although Cheto was very afraid of the trench, a batch of fish biscuits in exchange wasn't a bad deal. Besides, he was only going to take a look at the light shield. He wouldn't go too far, so there shouldn't be any danger. The trench that Cheto was talking about was right next to the city. Sillin could see it through the light shield. Looking at the trench from the city inside the light shield, it felt as if the city was sitting on the edge of a cliff. There was actually some distance between the edge of the city and the trench, but this distance was nothing compared to the extremely wide trench. According to Cheto, the predators that Lung mentioned were the creatures that lived in this trench. The Mere people called them guardians, not predators as the people of the Andrira family called them. This was because these sea beasts got along very well with the Mere people here, and they would also help to guard the waters around the city. Even though these sea beasts were the smallest in size among the underwater creatures, they were very strong. Moreover, they often lived in groups. Even some of the larger sea beasts wouldn't take the initiative to provoke them. Because of this, the Mere people had been living here peacefully for nearly 1,000 years. Mere said that there were many sea beasts in the trench, and their tempers were generally not good. The Guardians' tempers were considered the best, and they were the easiest to get along with. However, other than the Guardians and a few sea beasts that were accepted by the Mere people, the sea beasts in the trench would not go near this city. "There's a big guy here. We don't dare to provoke it. According to the elders, that guy is very annoying. It often snores, and it makes us feel like there's an earthquake there," Cheto complained. "Big guy." "Yes, there will be a tremor every few years. I have never seen the real appearance of that big guy, but the chief has a record of it. When we were receiving education, the chief showed it to us." Cheto shook her head and told Sillin about the education they received when they were young. However, the more Sillin listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. He interrupted Cheto and asked, "When did you receive your education?" Cheto thought for a moment and replied, "Starting from the age of 5, until we were 20. We need to learn a lot of things. It's very annoying." "How old are you now?" "I'm very young now, only 51 years old. Don't look down on me because I'm short. My mother said that I'm not an adult yet, so I can continue to grow." Saying this, Cheto showed off his biceps. Sillin was speechless. "How old do you become an adult at?" Sillin asked. "It's hard to say. A long time ago, the rule was 20 years old. Later it became 30 and now, the chief set it at 60. Because our lifespan has increased, we should be 300 years old." "Yes, that's what the chief said." Cheto was still immersed in the joy of being able to continue to grow. In fact, the current Mere people were already taller than ordinary people. Standing in front of Cheto, Sillin was shorter than him by 2 heads. As they were talking, the sea beast that Cheto helped to brush its tongue slowly crawled out of the light shield. It passed through the light shield that isolated the water layer, and then began to play happily in the sea outside. Looking at the sea beast swimming happily outside, Cheto also began to itch. There shouldn't be any danger, right? Sillin saw that after Cheto passed through the light shield, his 2 legs merged together, forming a fishtail structure. Some fins appeared on his body, and his 2 arms also changed. A layer of membrane formed over their eyes to protect them, so that they could better play in the sea. Now Cheto was more like a pure underwater resident. Just like what he said, most of the time, They thought of themselves as sea beasts. Entering the sea environment, Cheto was chasing and playing with the guardian sea beast. Although his speed was not as fast as the sea beast, compared to many people who were good at swimming, he was already very fast. Huimao gave the fish biscuit to Silin for safekeeping, and then jumped out to swim with the two sea beasts. However, 5 minutes later, the sea monster that was playing with Korea suddenly swallowed Korea into its mouth, and then hurriedly swam towards the city. After entering the light shield, it spat Korea out. What's wrong? Is there danger? After Cheto came out of its mouth, he didn't care about the water on his body, and looked outside the light shield. On the other side, a tentacle stretched out from the trench, and Huimao, who was standing there motionless, was wrapped up like an ant. Cheto anxiously patted the guardian sea beast next to him, asking it to go over and help. However, before it could move its feet, the huge tentacle that was wrapped around Huimao outside the light shield was broken into pieces. Cheto and the sea beast were stunned, especially the guardian sea beast. Its tail stiffened. Perhaps it didn't expect that the little fat cat would have such a strong combat power. The owner of the tentacle gradually emerged from the trench, and the other tentacles also stretched out. However, now it didn't care about the little thing that had cut off its tentacle, and instead, it swam upstream as if it was running for its life. Woo! The deep roar was full of deterrence, and the sound waves hit the light, creating ripples. A huge mouth emerged from the trench, biting the tentacle monster that was trying to escape, and then sank down, dragging the prey in its mouth. The tentacle monster couldn't break free no matter how hard it struggled. Silin saw that the huge mouth was only partially exposed, and not even its head was completely exposed. However, this was enough for Silin to see how powerful the creatures in the trench were. Although the two of them were bigger than the other, they were nothing compared to the size of the trench. This trench was like a passage to another world, and it made people flinch. Cheto patted her chest, still a little nervous. As expected, we can't get close to that trench. If it was just those guardians, they had enough perception and speed to escape from the sea beasts they couldn't handle. However, the Myrians couldn't, so every time the Myrians went out, they would bring these guardians with them. After so many years, they had built up a solid trust between them. Just like how he didn't worry or fear when Cheto was directly swallowed into the guardian's mouth. When Huimao returned to the city, Cheto's eyes were looking at it strangely, as if she was looking at an expert. Silin Lung is awake. Cheto sent a message. After receiving Cheto's message, Silin grabbed Huimao and ran to the old chief's house. Seeing Silin running to the chief's house, Cheto also followed. Although he wasn't very smart, he knew that it was about the person who consumed the tear of God. It worked. Didn't that mean they could go out and play now? At the old chief's house, Lung was sitting on the stone bed. His complexion was a little bad, but his eyes were full of excitement. Ingweji was very happy that Lung had woken up, but his young master had been sitting silently ever since he woke up. No one knew what he was thinking. Had the tear of God worked? Why did it look like nothing had changed? Young master, do you feel unwell? Ingweji asked. Lung pinched his throat, furrowed his brows, and then relaxed them. Then he had a conflicted expression on his face, and then his face lit up with joy. Lung's expression kept changing. Ingweji and the other subordinates were really anxious to death, but they didn't want to rush him. They had no experience with this at all. They looked at the clan elder, but the old man was also at a loss. The manual didn't say anything about what would happen to the person who woke up. I'm fine. After a long silence, Lung finally said those 3 words. The first word sounded a little strange, the second word was a little stiff, but everything returned to normal by the third word. Silin happened to hear Lung's voice when he came in. He looked at Lung and asked, "Did something happen to your throat?" Lung nodded and pinched his throat again. He couldn't help but smile. I'm not used to it yet, but I'll get used to it very soon. Young master, did something happen to your throat? Ingweji asked. Lung cleared his throat and answered, the second sound. The second sound? Ingweji and the others were confused. However, when the old chief heard it, he slapped his thigh. Yes, that's it. I heard that people who successfully mutate will have a second sound. The That seems to be the case. The old chief took out an old-fashioned record book and flipped through it. The first sound is your old one. It's used to talk to people, and the second sound is used to communicate with sea beasts. Then how different are they from us tamers? Pescado asked. Tamers could tame many sea beasts without making a sound. If it was just the sound, it didn't sound like much. The chief looked at Pescado with disdain, and pointed at the guardian sea beast behind Syria, who was peeking at the door. Didn't you say that you can't tame them? If you can't even tame a guardian with such a gentle temperament, then you can't tame the other sea beasts in the trench. I guess you can only tame some small fish in the middle and upper seas. Those guys are gentle? Gentle my ass. Small fish? Small fish you kick. The old chief's words were very infuriating. Ingweji and the others were very dissatisfied, especially when they heard the old chief's tone. It really made them want to slap him. However, the old chief's words did explain a lot of problems. The old chief didn't care about the dissatisfied looks of Ingweji and the others. He continued, if he successfully mutated and created a second sound, then he can communicate with that guy in the trench and let it send you back to the surface. That guy? Lung was confused. Sillin thinks that the guy the old chief was talking about was probably the sea beast in the trench that Syria mentioned. How do you feel now? The old chief asked Lung. I'm fine. Lung pinched his throat again. Then go outside and try it. However, before you can be sure that you can control the second sound, don't go to the trench. Okay. Lung couldn't wait to give it a try. Ever since he successfully mutated and created a second sound, he felt much closer to this sea. He always felt that he could understand the creatures in the sea better. Lung first tried it in the sea on the opposite side of the city and the trench. This time the evolution was successful. Not only did he have a second sound, his body's affinity with the sea environment had also greatly increased. He felt like he was a sea beast living here, able to breathe freely and swim freely in the deep sea. Now he was completely capable of swimming to the surface. However, Lung definitely wouldn't leave the others behind and run away by himself. The results of the first test were not bad. Lung made a nearby sea beast come over obediently. It automatically stuck out its tongue and swung it twice. That guy even rolled a few times as if it was playing a treasure, as if it was acting cute. Looking at the sea beast acting cute in front of Lung, Huimao, who was squatting on Silin's shoulder, squinted its eyes and said disdainfully, "How dare you?" Silin glanced at it, and didn't say anything. This cat had probably forgotten that it was also an immoral creature. After testing out a couple of sea beasts, Lung finally arrived at a certain part of the oceanic trench under the guidance of the old clan elder. This place wasn't far from where Silin had been earlier, but there was a stone platform here. The mere people in the city all gathered here. They wanted to witness this historical moment with their own eyes. After this, they would be able to put down the responsibilities and burdens in their hearts and go sightseeing on the surface. Lung stood on the platform. Ingweji and the others looked at their young master without blinking. How proud, how fucking proud. This was Andryra's successor. A true and indisputable successor. Lung followed the records in the elder's old notebook. After adjusting his state, he began to communicate with the guy in the trench. After Lung finished communicating, everyone held their breath and waited for what would happen next. Bang! Following the sound that came from the trench, the surrounding Earth's crust trembled. The group looked around and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. However, the guards were all lowering their heads and sticking close to the ground. Their bodies were trembling, and even the folds of skin that they habitually spread out when they encountered danger were wilting. Their eyes were filled with fear, and their mouths were making muffled sounds. They didn't look as imposing as before. Look! One of the mere people pointed in the trench. There a group of bubbles floated up. They were densely packed, almost filling up the entire trench. Such a large number was truly spectacular. Huimao, who was squatting on Silin's shoulder, moved closer to Silin's ear and whispered, "Is that a collective fart of the sea beasts in the trench?" Silin pinched Huimao's ear. "Don't talk nonsense." Huimao flicked his ear. In any case, he just felt that those bubbles were like farts. Otherwise, why would they have the color of shit? Sillin looked at the bubbles that were still rising up. Although they were colored, they were definitely not the farts of the sea beasts, as Huimao said. Chapter 368. As a large number of bubbles rose, some of the gases in the bubbles dissolved into the water. Sillin extended his finger through the barrier and touched the seawater outside. The results of the analysis from his finger surprised Sillin. There were many kinds of gases in the bubbles. Some could be used as fuel, while others were poisonous. Of course, as long as the amount did not reach a lethal level, it would not be a threat. However, these gases were all mixed together, and in such a deep sea at that. After the bubbles rose, a few sea beasts swam out. The sea beasts that lived in the trenches were generally larger. Even if they were not large, they were still difficult to deal with, such as the guardians that the millers spoke of. Sillin saw the tentacle-like creatures that he had seen before, as well as a few larger sea beasts. However, these sea beasts all fled as if they were taking refuge. Those that did not escape fled to other parts of the trench. Bang! Another loud noise rang out. The entire undersea city shook along with it. The sea beasts fled even faster. The guardians that stayed with the millers gathered together and stuck close to the ground. Their eyes were filled with fear. It's here. The elder was trembling with excitement. The legendary ruler of the trench, the true ruler of the deep sea, Antique. Celia and the others were also staring at the trench. They had only heard about the tyrant of the trench, Antique, from their elders, and their elders had only heard about it from their elders' elders. None of them had actually seen the giant beast at the top of the food chain in the oceanic paradise. The seawater began to churn. From the swaying seaweed, it could be seen that the seawater was churning on a large scale, and it was getting more and more intense. Lung stood there nervously. He could feel that big fellow approaching. Although it had no ill intentions, the pressure it gave off was too great. Woo! A low sound came from the bottom of the trench. It sounded like muffled thunder in everyone's ears, and it grew louder by the second. Some of the millers had already covered their ears and retreated in fear, huddling together with the guardians, in search of a sense of security. Sillin recorded the sound of this sea beast. He could analyze many things from the sound. Woo! There was another sound, this one much closer and louder than the previous one. Lung, who was standing on the platform, also let out a strange cry as he communicated with the sea beast. After that, the sea beast didn't roar anymore. Instead, it let out a relatively gentle sound that wouldn't make people feel like it was unbearable. The creatures that usually created death factors all avoided the deep and serene trench, making way for them. Some of the plants on the walls of the trench also shrank. When the huge head appeared, everyone couldn't help but take a deep breath. He had always thought that the trench was wide, but to this big guy, it wasn't. As the sea beast slowly swam upstream, Sillin finally got a good look at it. However, when they saw the true face of this big guy, not only Sillin, but Ingweji and the others also thought of the same thing. The sea beast on the round platform. When they first arrived, they had entered the second floor of the hill, and placed the Star Atlas fragment into a round table. The round table then rotated and formed a pattern. It was no surprise that it was this sea beast. 1,000 years? The only 1,000-year beast Sillin had ever seen was that giant viper. However, this huge guy in front of them was probably much older than that. Was this a hint from the round table? Sea beasts that lived for this long were highly intelligent creatures, even if they didn't understand human speech. They couldn't be treated carelessly. While Lung was communicating with the big guy, Sillin patiently listened to Huimao's complaints. Why does this big guy look so stupid? The sea beasts around here aren't good either. They don't even know how to speak or use their tails to stand upright. Sillin knew that Huimao was thinking about his friends in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire and his pet, Blue Skin. It was just too embarrassed to say it out loud. Blue Skin won't grow this big in the future. Its mother is only as big as some of the middle-level creatures in this trench, Sillin said. Huimao disagreed. It's useless to just grow big without a brain. Blue skin sea beasts are so cunning. This sea beast is smart. Smart my ass. Sillin didn't argue with it anymore. The cat was throwing a tantrum right now and wouldn't listen to anything he said. After communicating with the big guy for a while, Lung smiled at Ingweji and the others. Antique said it can help us get up there. Antique was the sea beast's name. Young master, I have a question, Pescado said. If you really can control all the sea beasts, why did you have to summon this big guy? The other sea beasts should be able to help, right? Is it because this big guy doesn't allow it? Lung shook his head. The other sea beasts can't help us. Part of the reason is because of Antique, but it's not the main reason. 1,000 years ago, the first person who drank the tear of God told them that they weren't allowed to help anyone who came to the bottom of the sea return to the surface. They could only wait for the next person who drank the tear of God and successfully developed a second voice. The sea beasts in the trench aren't stupid. Even if they can't obey this rule anymore, they'll tell their descendants what to do. Plus, with Antique around, the sea beasts in the trench and some of the larger sea beasts won't violate this rule. So that's how it is. Plus, I wanted to try out the tear of God's ability. If it can't tame the ruler of the sea, then it won't be the real tear of God. Or rather, it might not be worthy of its name. In the end, it seems like it lives up to its name. Young master, what did you talk about with that big guy for so long? Another person asked. We talked about the past, but it wasn't willing to talk too much about the Shi family. It promised those people that it wouldn't say anything. But it also said that the Shi family is its friend, and the Shi family's friend is its friend. The reason why I was able to obtain the tear of God is because of some sort of relationship. It will help us. There was no way Silin would take Lung's last sentence seriously. If Lung hadn't mutated and created a second voice to communicate with the big guy, then the big guy probably wouldn't have a good attitude even if it had come out of hiding. Deep sea beasts didn't have good tempers. Blue Skin, for example, had two extreme tempers. It could act coquettishly to people it acknowledged, but it could only be seen as food to everyone else. Ingweji and the others were finally able to return when most mechanical technology in the deep sea couldn't be used, and the expensive triangular spaceplane was severely crippled. Moreover, it was a rewarding trip. Antique grabbed the crippled spaceplane with its claws and swam to the surface. Ingweji and the others stayed inside the spaceplane while Lung stood on Antique's head. He leaned against one of the giant horns on Antique's head and followed the creature upwards. Silin, Huimao, and Cheto were with the Mere people. This was the first time the Mere people had swum upstream as a group. With Antique clearing the way and the Guardians protecting them, all they had to do now was swim upstream. This was the first time the Mere people had swum upstream without any worries in the last 1,000 years. Syria and the others felt that they were the luckiest generation of the Mere race. Not only did they see the ruler of the trench, they were also able to let go of the responsibility they had carried for 1,000 years. Every Mere person was cheering. Silin had also obtained what he wanted. The ores and materials he needed were plentiful at the bottom of Sea Paradise. The deep sea was rich in all kinds of ores, and even some of the rare ores in the League of Stars were very common here. The Mere people would often ask the Guardians to help them transport some stones to the city. They wanted to forge something. Moreover, the Mere people really did treat these ores like normal stones. When Silin said he wanted to buy them, the old patriarch waved his hand and said, "Take them." However, he didn't want Silin's money no matter what. Even though Silin said that these ores were worth a lot in the League of Stars, the old patriarch didn't agree. In the end, Silin left them some trinkets and dry rations, including a few bags of fish biscuits. It was rare that Huimao didn't throw a tantrum. It was very smart. The value of those ores far exceeded the few bags of fish biscuits that were given away. After swimming past the middle layer of the ocean, Silin finally understood the use of those stairs under the coral reef. Antique stepped on those stairs and walked up step by step. However, perhaps because Antique had grown taller in the last 1,000 years, a part of his huge feet was still exposed on the stairs. Then Antique seemed to be impatient. With every step he took, he would forcefully grind and widen the stairs. In the upper layer of the ocean, many sea beasts and small fish ran away after sensing the commotion, including the sea beasts on the atoll. In an instant, the atoll that was originally filled with sea beasts was cleared. On the surface of the ocean, huge waves rose up like a tsunami. Then a huge beast's head appeared and rose up step by step. Antique didn't continue moving forward after approaching the atoll. That place couldn't support him, and he would only destroy the atoll if he went over. He pushed the aircraft that Ingweji and the others were onto the surface of the ocean. He used a lot of strength, and the aircraft just happened to stop at a place suitable for landing. After Huimao jumped onto the atoll, he ran to the area that he had circled around. When he found out that there were still a few sea beasts that didn't know what was good for them, that had invaded his territory, Huimao bared his fangs and brandished his claws, wanting to teach them a lesson. In the end, he was grabbed by Silin and thrown into the aircraft. This triangular aircraft was in a half-scrapped state, and there were robots in charge of repairs on the main aircraft that was parked in the air. After the triangular aircraft was parked, Lung let the robots come down to repair it. However, because of the planet itself, their repair speed wasn't fast. It took almost a day for the triangular aircraft to show some improvement. This improvement was more than enough. Lung was fine as long as he could fly into the main aircraft. After all, he had no use for the triangular aircraft after leaving the planet. While the spaceplane was being repaired, Huimao seized the opportunity to fish out the guardian heart crystals. Later on, he asked Korea and the others to help him. Korea and the other youngsters were happy to leave the sea for the first time. They gifted the crystals to Huimao as a gift. As for themselves, they lived in sea paradise to begin with. How could they lack crystals like this? They could just find a coral reef if they wanted to. Did you bring the seeds? Silin asked Cheto. Yes, I did. Silin asked Cheto to collect some of the plant seeds from the coral reefs and the sea. He kept them for Silin because the plants here were very special. He could learn a lot of information from them. Cheto had also recorded everything he experienced during this trip. When the time came, he would select a portion and send it to Ayu. This was what Ayu had requested from Silin. Ayu didn't care who got the tier of gods in the end. He only wanted to know about the Shi family. For example, that underwater city. Antique seemed to be very reluctant to see Lung leave. Right now he was communicating with Lung. There was no way the Andryra family would let go of this place after Lung obtained the tier of gods and learned about the underwater city. Although they wouldn't bring any trouble to this place, they would definitely send more people here in the future. However, Lung had to be the one to take the lead. After all, the sea beasts here, such as the guardians, wouldn't be polite to anyone. Before leaving, Antique swam to where Silin and Huimao were. Under Lung's translation, he communicated with Silin and Huimao. Antique was very curious about the snakeskin coat Silin was wearing. It was because he could sense an ancient and powerful aura just like himself. Although they weren't of the same species or sea beasts, it was still very difficult to find a beast like this. As for Huimao, Antique only said, "Come and play more in the future when you have time. I have a lot of ores there." This one sentence caused Antique's status in Huimao's heart to soar. Huimao, who had been wearing a fierce expression, was now grinning from ear to ear. His smug look made Silin want to slap him. Wheeze's good impression of Antique had increased once again, and it made Silin take out a scale and give it to Antique. To Antique, that scale was really too small. However, this small scale contained a lot of power. At least, it was an absolute deterrent to many beasts. Antique was very happy to receive this small gift, and chatted with Huimao for a long time. Pescado, who was not far away, poked Ingweji, who had a serious expression on his face. Why do I feel that the big sea beast's attitude towards Fat Cat is better than Master's? Ingweji thought about it and said, "After all, they're both beasts, and not ordinary ones at that. Of course they're different." This wasn't a good reason, but they couldn't think of a reason. Although they had thought about it before, they didn't dare admit it. That Fat Cat couldn't be as powerful as Antique, could it? When they had first arrived, it was only their group and their lonely aircraft. However, when they left, there were mill tribesmen on the surface of the ocean and on the atoll. Many guardian sea beasts created splashes, and there was even a huge sea beast that watched them ascend into the sky. On this trip, Lung had obtained the tier of gods. When he returned, he would become a figure in the Andryra family that wouldn't lose to his grandfather, Andryra Phocos. In fact, his authority might even be greater than Phocos. Silin, on the other hand, had obtained what he wanted. These ores and materials were enough for the 11th squad to develop further. He had already experienced this land of evil, so he had no regrets. Perhaps in the near future, he would return to this planet and visit that city under the deep blue ocean. Sitting in the seat of the aircraft, Sillin thought as he turned a crystal in his hand. The crystal looked very ordinary, and it wasn't cut very well. It wasn't as eye-catching as those exquisitely processed gems. However, this crystal was far harder than it looked. Although it wasn't precisely cut, it was as enchanting as a flower when a ray of light shone on it. "What is this?" Pescado asked. "A souvenir," Sillin replied while turning the crystal in his hand. Pescado wasn't interested in the crystal at all. After a yawn, he returned to the lounge to sleep just like his companions. Andryra's people, including Lung, were already resting in the lounge. This trip had taken too much effort, and Lung hadn't fully mastered the second voice yet. Communicating with Antique for such a long time was exhausting enough for him. The aircraft was on autopilot, so Sillin tossed the crystal in his hand and asked the reading Cheto, "How do you think the Shi family managed to seal those giant sea beasts?" The sea beasts sealed inside the crystal were so lively and natural that many of them looked exactly the same as before they were sealed. One could only say that the sealing process was too sudden, too short, and too unexpected. Cheto closed his book and said, "I'm not sure. Those crystals are very uniform, very hard, and more than 90% of them are made up of water molecules." The crystal in Sillin's hand was one of the sealed sea beast specimens. It took a lot of effort to cut it out, and after multiple analyses, Sillin couldn't help but be puzzled by its composition. What kind of technology did the Shi family use back then? It was unimaginable. The gray cat lying on Sillin's lap didn't look like it was sleeping at all. It was sleeping thoughtlessly, and no one knew what it was dreaming about. It even chuckled twice. The spaceplane didn't fly straight back to the Andryra family's encampment. Instead, it landed on a planet and separated from Sillin's group. "Why are we taking a passenger starship again, Sillin?" Huimao complained. "A passenger starship is inconspicuous." There was nothing Sillin could do about it. According to the news Sillin received, all private spaceplanes had been strictly inspected as of late. Only a handful of people in Sector H knew about this, and no one else knew about it. For now, Sillin didn't know the specific reason. He would contact Sillin when he learned about it. As for now, Sillin waved the only ticket in his hand and said, "Just make do with it." Sillin only bought one ticket. Huimao and Cheto didn't need tickets. When Sillin boarded the passenger starship leaving Sector, Huimao and Cheto had already boarded the starship without anyone noticing. After the starship took off, Sillin pulled down his sleep pod and fell asleep. He was a little dizzy from thinking too much. After a couple of space jumps, the passenger starship entered normal flight mode when it passed through a magnetic field. Somewhere inside the starship, Huimao was crouching on top of the starship's shell and looking at the stars. "Cheto, do you think we'll run into space robbers?" Huimao asked Cheto next to him with an expectant look. Cheto was lying down with his arms pillowed on top of his head. After hearing Huimao's question, he answered, "According to the data we've collected so far, there's a 99% chance that we won't run into them. The League of Stars may be chaotic right now, but there are very few robbers in this area." Cheto had just finished speaking when an explosion came from one of the starship's passenger cabins. Huimao flicked his ears and wagged his tail. "I think the 1% has appeared." Chapter 369. It wasn't that Cheto was wrong. It was true that there were very few robberies in this area, and even a hunter would have to behave themselves. After all, the influence of the few big families in Sector H was too great, and everyone had to give them some face. No robber would be stupid enough to come to this place and rob. However, what happened right now was truly out of everyone's expectations. No one would have thought that something like this would happen in this place. The moment Huimao noticed the commotion in the passenger cabin, he immediately went over to watch the show. Cheto didn't want to stay here any longer. Although the passenger cabin where the accident happened wasn't the one Sillin was in, the two cabins were very close to each other. There was no telling what might happen. Sillin had been sleeping very well at first, and he even deduced a couple of formulas in his sleep. But he was woken up by a series of explosions. The passengers around him were very panicked, and they only calmed down a little after the flight attendants came over to calm them down. It was because everyone believed that no serious accident could happen in this area. And even if something did happen, someone would come over very quickly to deal with it. However, to their disappointment, the cabin door they were in was blown open with a bang the moment the group of people in the cabin sat down. Two brawny men with guns and shoulder cannons stood outside the door. It was their shoulder cannons that blew open the cabin door just now. The cabin door was controlled by a password, but the captain didn't tell them the password. After their jammer came into effect, the door was shut even tighter. The only way to save time was to blow it open. The appearance of the two people at the door caused the passengers who had just calmed down to panic once more. It was only after the two brawny men fired a couple of shots to silence the passengers that the cabin finally quieted down. Normally, people who rode passenger starships didn't have powerful backgrounds, and they weren't rich people either. If that was the case, who would ride passenger starships in the first place? They would have flown away in their personal spaceplanes a long time ago. However, although the people here weren't exactly rich, they were still relatively rich compared to the normal people of the other sectors. Most of the people who came to Sector H were here to make a fortune. Sector H was one of the sectors ranked at the top of the 10 free trade sectors in terms of overall evaluation. Robbers. This was the common reaction of the people in the cabin when they saw the duo. The flight attendant and the mechanical assistants did not move at all. They did not know what to do because the guards on the starship did not appear. They had not appeared yet. In other words, if they were to continue like this, they wouldn't be able to count on those guards. What about the defense system? It was also malfunctioning, as if the signal had been interfered with. Now the control room on the starship had been completely replaced. The original pilots had been beaten unconscious and thrown to the side and tied up. No captain spoke, and no guards appeared on the starship. The passengers knew that there was no point in looking forward to it. Saving their lives was more important. They just hoped that these robbers would let them go. However, to everyone's surprise, one of the robbers went straight to a seat, and then pulled the person on the seat away without looking at anyone else. "Hey, what are you doing? I don't have much money on me. Don't hit me, don't hit me. I'll give you whatever you want, okay? Don't kill me." The person who was being pulled like a little chick said shakily. However, the strong man who was pulling him ignored him completely and walked away, leaving the group of passengers staring at each other. However, there were still two strong men standing guard at the door, so they did not dare to move carelessly. Even people who thought they had good mobility would not dare to act carelessly. Didn't they see that the robbers were fully armed? 2 fists are no match for a cannon barrel. There was an uncle sitting next to Sillin. The uncle looked at the two people at the door with trepidation, and was about to share his feelings with the people next to him when he realized that there was no one beside him since some time ago. Celine had already hidden himself when the cabin door was blasted open. The seat he had bought was close to the corner, so he didn't have much of a presence. Just now, while everyone's attention was attracted by the explosion, he had already made his move. These people did not look like robbers, but more like violent people. There was not much greed in their eyes, but more disregard for life. In their eyes, these passengers were not even comparable to insects. They were organized and planned violent people. They were definitely not after money. The person who was taken away just now was a doctor. Sillin was sure that he was just an ordinary doctor with no special background. Even such a doctor was forcibly taken away. Could it be that these people's target was the doctor on the starship? The fact that they were able to go directly to that seat after coming in showed that these people were very familiar with the information of the passengers on this passenger starship. Sillin used fake information, so he was not afraid that they would find out anything. The person who was being pulled was directly taken to a lounge, which belonged to the main people in charge of this starship. The others would not have such good treatment. There was a person lying on the bed in the lounge, a woman who was almost middle-aged. Because of her injuries, she looked very weak. Her complexion was very bad, and her skin was a little dry and cracked. Even if the person sitting next to her kept using the humidifier to relieve her, it did not help. No matter how beautiful a person was, after being tortured to this state by illness, she would not be much better, at least on the surface. There were two people sitting next to the patient on the bed. One was the person who kept using the humidifier, and the other was fiddling with some medicine. He should also be a doctor. However, looking at the way they interacted and how casual they were with each other, they should be in cahoots. Boss, here he is. The strong man who walked in put down the poor doctor in his hands and pushed him forward. The doctor was originally frightened, and his legs were weak. He was still fine after being pulled all the way here, but now that he was put down and saw the people in the room, he felt his legs go even weaker, and he directly knelt on the ground. The person sitting next to the bed holding the humidifier with his back facing the door finally turned his head slowly. He was also a very strong and burly man, with thick brown hair covering his head, just one side of his face, and he did not even look directly at the eyes, but it made the poor doctor feel as if he had been cut by a knife. His aura was too strong, and it was oppressive and tyrannical. It was like a steel knife with a threatening murderous aura, making people who saw him tremble in fear, afraid that they would not be able to avoid him in time. "Come here," the man said. It was just 2 words, but it made people feel unusually depressed. The doctor who was kneeling on the ground trembled, and felt that he could not breathe. He moved forward a little timidly, and then directly went limp. The eyebrows of the person who pulled him over trembled. He did not expect that the doctor would be so useless, and he had already fainted before he could be used. "Boss, should we get rid of this?" The person at the door did not dare to look at his boss. He was afraid to look directly into his boss's eyes. "Throw him out." The person sitting on the bed looked at the patient, and said without turning his head. These 3 words were light, but it made the big man guarding the door clearly feel that his boss was now even angrier, but because of the person on the bed he had been suppressing his anger. Don't be fooled by his gentleness to the patient on the bed. If it was someone else, he would definitely not have such an attitude. "Yes. We are looking for other doctors on the passenger list, and I believe that someone will be sent here soon." The voice of the big man at the door was getting smaller and smaller. He originally wanted to comfort his boss, but now the more he spoke, the less confidence he had. He wanted to slap himself a few times. Seeing that his boss did not speak, the big man carefully raised his head and looked over. His boss still had his back facing the door, and he was gently nursing the patient with the humidifier. However, after the person who was dispensing the medicine on the other side gave him a look, the big man hurriedly picked up the person who fainted on the floor and took him out of the room. The person holding the bottle looked at the patient on the bed, then looked at the other one, sighed softly, and continued to fiddle with the medicine in his hand. Although they had long been used to seeing life and death, and were also prepared to meet God or go to hell in the next moment, when it really came to this moment, they were reluctant, especially when the person who was about to leave was their dear friend. The feeling of helplessness was even stronger. No one could escape death, and no one was willing to bear that kind of helplessness and despair. The person sitting next to the bed carefully moved the humidifier, so that it could work better. Suddenly, his arm that was moving the humidifier paused, and the next moment, his other hand was already holding a gun, pointing at a certain part of the room, and fired 3 consecutive shots. The penetrating power of the bullet was very strong, and it went through the wall of the room, and shot to the other side of the wall. The wall that was left with bullet marks cracked outwards from the bullet holes, turning into debris and falling down. The originally small bullet hole became the size of a fist in less than a breath's time. He raised his hand, raised the gun and shot, and this series of actions was also completed in an extremely short period of time. The person holding the bottle on the other side of the bed also stopped what he was doing, took out his gun, and looked at the bullet hole vigilantly. There was someone on the other side of the wall, and it was not one of their people. Before entering this room, they had cleaned up the surrounding restrooms, and there were people guarding the outside, so how could someone enter the room next to it? Their own people would definitely not do it, and they knew their boss's temper, so it could only be someone else. Through the 3 fist-sized holes, the 2 people on this side saw the unknown person on the other side. They did not know him, but this would not lower their vigilance. Under the gaze of the two people on this side, a finger poked into one of the holes, and then cut to the side, like a knife cutting bread. It looked very easy, and soon, a door-shaped passage was cut. The person holding the humidifier narrowed his eyes. He was sure that he had hit the person on the other side of the wall just now, or there would have been another sound of the wall being pierced. But who was this person? Cheto passed through the wall and walked over, but he did not approach. If he approached recklessly, the other party would become even more hostile towards him. And this was not Cheto's intention. Seeing that the other party did not move or move closer, the person sitting on the bed asked, "Are you from the 6th Corps? Or the 5th Corps, the 8th Corps, or even the 2nd Corps?" The person put down the humidifier in his hand and looked at the person walking over from the other side of the wall. This was the first time he put down the humidifier in his hand since entering this room. None of them. This voice did not belong to Cheto. Behind Cheto, Sillin walked over from the other side of the wall. "Blood-Eye Aiken?" Sillin looked at the person sitting on the bed. After Sillin exited the passenger cabin, he snuck into the room next door through the air vent at the top of the passageway. It was also there that Sillin received Lung's specific information. The reason Sector H was under martial law right now was because there were reports that a dangerous person had entered this sector and stolen a luxurious spaceplane. Aiken thus, one of the major forces that had recently risen up in Sector V. The leader of the Freedom Army. Because Aikenthus's eyes were as red as blood, he was also called Blood-Eye Aiken by the people. However, no one knew why Aikenthus would come here. He was a dangerous person. He was bad-tempered, tyrannical, and very strong. It was obvious from the fact that he was able to detect the movements in the other room through the wall, just now that his senses were very strong. And his actions of firing the gun were extremely fast. Just now, Cheto was just trying to touch the wall to install a surveillance device. He did not expect to be shot 3 times the moment he touched the wall. Sillin looked at Aiken thus. Right now, Aikenthus's eyes were no longer blood red. Many people recognized Aiken thus from his signature blood-red eyes, but that was not the case right now. Right now, Aikenthus's eyes were a little off. Even their movements were a little stiff, and they did not have much luster. This was because Aiken thus had used drugs. He knew that his signature blood-red eyes would be easily recognized by others, but his eyes were too special. A lot of drugs were useless against him, and he could not wear contact lenses or dye them conventionally. In the end, it was Enlacen, the person who had been concocting the drugs next to him, who finally came up with the drug after a period of research. However, the side effect was that after using the drug, one's eyesight would decrease, and their eyes would not be able to keep up with the body's movements. Even so, Aikenthus's senses were undeniable. The drug controlled the color of his eyes. When Sillin first saw them, they were brown, a brown that did not have much luster. However, after Sillin said Aikenthus's name, his eyes began to change. It was as if they were dyed with blood, and the brown color spread from the edges until it covered his entire pupil. Some people described Blood-Eye Aiken's eyes as hell, and they were not lying. At the very least, Sillin felt like it. When the color of blood covered Aikenthus's pupils, everything around him seemed to have fallen into a space filled with blood. In reality, this was just an illusion caused by the psychological pressure of a gaze, but there were not many people who could resist this kind of pressure. When people looked at Blood-Eye Aiken, they felt that everything around them had been dyed red. Hearing Sillin reveal his true identity, Aiken thus did not continue to disguise himself. Moreover, the drug would restrict the movement of his eyes. The enemy was clearly very strong, and Aiken did not expect the people outside to be of much help. Therefore, he decisively removed the drug's control. This way he would be able to deal with what was coming next better. The blood eyes that had returned to their original color showed that the owner of this body was extremely hostile towards the newcomers. It was as if he wanted to come and kill them immediately. "We are just passers-by. We are not from the military, and we have no intention of tangling with you," Sillin said. Aiken thus did not trust Sillin. In fact, the number of people Aiken thus could trust could be counted on one hand, and considering the environment of Sector V, it was already good enough that people like them could be trusted. At first, Sillin did not plan to get involved. After all, he was also on this starship, and all he needed to do was pay attention to the enemy's movements. He would not participate in anything else. However, he did not expect that Cheto would be discovered. Since he was discovered, he could not go according to plan. According to the information Lung provided, Aiken thus would not let Sillin and Cheto go easily. Sillin was not afraid of fighting Aiken thus head-on, but he did not want to expose too much at a time like this. Aiken thus was operating in secret, and he himself had to conceal his tracks. Aiken thus was not planning to let Sillin and Cheto go. He was not afraid even if the enemy had shown him his uniqueness just now. Just as Achenthus was about to attack, Selene spoke up. Selene's words caused Achenthus, who was about to attack, to stop in his tracks. She can't hold on for much longer. 15 minutes at most. You know what will happen after 15 minutes. The person on the bed was very weak. From the rhythm of her breathing and the weak sound she made, Sillin could tell that she was one step closer to death with every passing moment. She's been poisoned. Plus, her body may be weak to begin with. It's one disaster after another, Sillin continued. If Sillin's first sentence was to stop Aiken thus, then Sillin's second sentence temporarily cut off Aikenthus's thoughts. Right now, he had no effective way to slow down the bedridden patient's condition. However, Sillin's words allowed Aiken thus to see a ray of hope. He was willing to try even if it was just a tiny bit. They did not go to Sector E because the military was keeping a close eye on that place. Sector H was undoubtedly the best choice other than Sector E. Sector H was a very prosperous sector because of the existence of great families like the Andryra family and many famous families with long histories in the League of Stars. They supported the prosperity of Sector H. Sector H had a lot of things, and its development was not limited to just one area. From food, clothing, housing, healthcare, literature, and education, all of them were well developed. They came to Sector H for treatment, but they did not expect some mistakes to occur along the way and be discovered. The water vapor in the bedridden patient's body was seriously evaporating, and she could not even eat normal food. What was even stranger was that liquid food would accelerate the rate of her body's exhaustion, and she could not be injected with nutrients through the infusion tube. She could not easily swallow dry rations either, so she could only rely on small specially made nutrition pills to support herself. While speaking, the fingers of the person on the bed moved. Her eyes moved on the dry, dead skin and flakes on her face, but they did not open. Aiken, I saw it. The person on the bed said. Her voice was very hoarse, and there were a few words that she could not utter. After saying this, she fell into a deep slumber again. 10 minutes left. Sillin looked at Aiken thus. You can save her? As long as you save her, I will agree to anything you want. As long as I can do it, even if it means going against the 8 great legions. Looking into Aikenthus's bloodshot eyes, Sillin shook his head. I cannot save her, but I can delay them. Chapter 370. How long? Achenthus asked hurriedly. Right now they were racing against time. There was a way to truly cure the illness, but the person on the bed could not afford to drag it out. They had already used up too much time, and the patient on the bed was almost at his limit. Give me 10 more hours, no 5 more hours. The starter medicine can be made after 5 hours. Inrainen said at the side. As a doctor, Inrainen had always thought that his medical skills were pretty good, but this incident had dealt a huge blow to him. If he could not win against Azrael's scythe, then he was a failure. Inri, the patient on the bed, and Aiken thus had grown up together since they were young. In an environment like Sector V, it was truly rare for them to have a friendship like this. Friendship that was like scrap metal in the eyes of many people in Sector V was like a precious treasure to him. He did not care how many people died in Sector V. Even if everyone in Sector V died, as long as the 3 of them were fine. He had come to Sector H to find the people he wanted to find. And Inrainen had also found a way to cure the illness. But no matter how he calculated, no matter how fast he sped up, he could not keep up with the speed at which the illness was worsening. Due to the rapid deterioration of the person on the bed, Achenthus did not hesitate to expose himself here, hijack the starship, and capture the starship's doctor. But none of them could prolong the illness. Rainin was about to give up at first, but Silen's words undoubtedly rekindled his confidence. I don't know how long I can prolong the illness. We'll only know after we try. Silen answered. As he spoke, Silen walked towards the bed. When Silen had just moved his feet, he had already felt Achenthus' strong hostility and murderous intent. This was not to say that Achenthus had a strong hostility towards Silen, but Achenthus's conditioned reflex. However, Silen stopped after taking 2 steps forward. If he walked too close, the other 2 would not be at ease, and Silen himself would not be at ease either. Blood-Eye Achenthus was not a good-tempered person, and if he got too close, Silen could not guarantee what would happen. He could not be sure if the other would kill him. After all, they were not familiar with each other, and no one knew each other's background. Silen's information was limited. After Silen stopped, he took out a green pearl and handed it over. Try this. It was true that the patient on the bed was poisoned, but the poison was very strange. It was alive. They were like a fire that quickly evaporated the water in the patient's body. However, they did not allow the patient to consume liquid food that contained a lot of water. They did not allow the patient to drink water either. If they did, they would make more noise, and the water would evaporate faster. The poison had seeped into every part of the patient's body, so injections were not allowed. They were like a group of monsters that hated water. They could not be seen, but they existed everywhere in the patient's body. Since the medicine didn't work, neither did the potions that contained a lot of water. Silen thinks about it and finally chose the green pearls. The affinity of nature and the gift of life force would allow the patient lying on the bed to hold on for a longer period of time. How long she can last will depend on herself. Silen wasn't sure. He didn't know the patient well. For different people, their desire to survive in desperate situations was also different. No one could determine the limit of a person's body's function. Aiken thus took the green pearl from Silen's hand. They had never seen such a pearl before, but the feeling after holding it in his hand ignited Aikenthus's confidence. The life force transmitted from such a little green pearl made Aiken thus have the urge to cry. How do I use it? Aiken thus asked Silen. Before this, he was still skeptical. But if the other party could take out such a precious item, he was definitely not from the military. Put it in her mouth. She won't be able to swallow it, but this green pearl can play a better role, Silen said. Aiken thus did as he was told. After he put the pearl into the patient's mouth, the patient's originally weak and almost non-existent breathing quickly grew a little stronger, and it continued to improve. Although the rate of improvement wasn't fast, it was the first good thing that had happened in so many days. The green pearl Silen gave out wasn't one of the 5 largest pearls he had, but one of the smaller ones. Speaking of which, some of these green pearls were Huemao's property. Right now, the bastard was probably grinding his claws in a corner to vent his anger. After this, Silen would have to buy cat food to appease him. Although the patient on the bed had walked a circle around the line of death, her desire to live was still very strong. Relsin passed a bottle of supplementary medicine to Aiken thus. It was a spray medicine that would provide some relief when sprayed on the surface of the patient's body. Using it alone wouldn't have any effect, but when combined with this green pearl, it would at least improve the situation a little. When Aiken thus was spraying the medicine on the patient on the bed, he suddenly stopped and looked at Silen and Cheto. The look in his eyes was very clear. Stay away. Silen didn't say anything. He turned around and walked next door. They would continue their conversation later. Cheto followed Silen back to the room next door. He even closed the wall board he had cut off on the way back. It was as if he was closing a door. After Silen returned to the room next door, Whis jumped out of nowhere and scratched Silen's trousers with its claws in dissatisfaction, producing a few strands of noodles. You should have just killed those bastards. You deal with one, Cheto deal with the other, and leave the small fries outside to me. The 3 of us can definitely take them out. But how can you give that treasure away? Even if you still have a dozen or so pearls in your hands, every one of them can be sold for a high price. I asked Lung, and he said that the value of the pearl will increase. Huimao continued to scratch. The surroundings had been set to silent, so Sillin wasn't afraid that the people in the room next door would hear them. Sillin twisted the back of Huimao's neck hair and brought it in front of him. I didn't say that I would give it to them for free. Huimao, who was baring his fangs and brandishing his claws a moment ago, suddenly felt his fur become tame again. Cheto, did you see the tattoo on the back of the patient on the bed just now? Sillin asked. I only saw a little. Cheto projected the scene just now. When Aiken thus was spraying the medicine on the patient, a little pattern on the patient's shoulder was revealed. Is that a feather? Huimao said. Only a little bit of the tattoo was revealed. It looked like the tip of a feather. After that, Aiken thus chased Sillin and Cheto out of the room. Is there something wrong with that tattoo? Huimao curled his tail and suddenly smiled strangely. Don't tell me you guys want to see that woman naked. Sillin gave him a slap and said, Is your brain filled with fish poop? Then why are you paying attention to this? Huimao flicked his ears. Sillin took out a document. It was a document Lung had sent him, and there was a picture in it. There were 3 people in the picture, and they were the 3 current leaders of a great force in Sector V called the Freedom Army. The one in the center was Blood-Eye Aiken. The one on Aiken's right was In Renault, and the one on his left was a masked man wearing a cloak. He was one of the 3 leaders of the Freedom Army, Blue. Blue was very mysterious, and not even the Andryra family had any concrete information about him. The Freedom Army's emblem is a blue bird. I heard that Blue was the one who drew it himself, and it was later confirmed as the Freedom Army's new emblem. Sillin read out a paragraph from the information and said, That patient can't be a small fry if he's able to gain Aikenthus and In Renault's attention. It's also possible that 2 of the 3 leaders have come out and left one behind to guard the base. However, if the patient has a feather tattoo of a kiss on his back, this made Sillin even more suspicious that Blue was the patient lying on the bed. They were truly relieved that all 3 leaders had come out. However, the people of Sector V probably didn't hold much weight in their hearts. 10 minutes later, 2 thumps came from the wall. Cheto deactivated the mute shield and moved the board away again. Let's talk terms, Aiken thus said. Right now, Akinthus's anxiety had calmed down a lot. It would seem that the patient was in good condition. Wheeze hit itself again the moment Cheto removed the wall planks. It was ready to counterattack the moment Cheto made a move. In fact, Wheeze was hoping that Cheto would cause some trouble, so that it would have a justifiable reason to take back the item and rob it again. However, to Huimao's disappointment, the other party didn't have that intention. Aiken thus didn't want Sillin to leak the information on their side, and Sillin also asked the other party to keep the matter between him and Cheto a secret. Sillin tossed another pill to Aiken thus. This is a nutrient pill. It's much better than the ones you have. It doesn't stimulate the patient too much, and it lasts longer. Aiken thus didn't say anything and accepted it. Hiding in a corner, Huimao continued to scratch his claws. That was a nutrient pill gifted by the food god. That wastrel Sillin had given away something valuable again. Name your price, Aiken thus said. I don't need the money. Sector V doesn't have many minerals I need anyway. I don't like owing favors. It can't be helped. I haven't decided yet, so you can owe me for now. Akinthus's bloody eyes stared at Sillin and Cheto for a moment. Then he nodded and said, All right, I'll owe you for now. Right now, the Freedom Army wasn't rich, they didn't have many minerals, and they weren't even equipped with advanced weapons. All they had was a bunch of people who weren't afraid of death. After they came to an agreement, Sillin asked Aiken thus, Where did the news of Osculos's death come from? Back then, star-rank hunter Osculos's death had come from the mouth of a violent organization leader at Sector V. However, no one knew who had told him. After that, Sector V fell into chaos, and a new group of rising forces developed extremely quickly. It wasn't long before the people of Sector V began to brazenly unleash their firepower and announced the establishment of the Freedom Alliance. Akinthus's Freedom Army was an important member of the Freedom Alliance. Sillin hoped to learn some information from Aiken thus, but Aiken thus himself didn't know. All I know is that a couple of famous leaders leaked news of Osculos's death at the time, and the forces that relied on Osculos began to fight amongst themselves. It was at that time that a lot of new forces began to develop, including us. Aiken thus expressed that he couldn't answer Silen's question. Also, those big shots are all dead. Some died by accident, some were killed by their subordinates or other forces. In short, the big shots who leaked the news are as dead as can be. The first thing Silen thought of was silencing. How could the big shots who had lived in Sector V for so many years be slaughtered so easily? And not just one of them at that. Although Aiken thus knew that something was amiss, the big shots were just unlucky. They seized this opportunity to rise to power, and if they didn't rise they would have been suppressed, and they would have become cannon fodder. This starship will land on an inconspicuous planet, Gao Peng said. Aiken thus said. This was to tell Silen that he could leave at that time. However, if you run into some Sector H escorts along the way, then it's hard to say. That won't happen, Silen answered confidently. You won't run into them. Don't worry and go. However, the premise is the safety of the passengers on the starship. Aiken thus was very curious about Silen's identity. The fact that he could say this with such certainty meant that he was connected to at least one of the big families in Sector H. Even so, his relationship wasn't shallow. Even so, he still had to hide his identity. Who on earth was he? Aiken thus fulfilled his promise and ordered his subordinates to stop attacking the passengers. Of course, the disobedient passengers couldn't blame them. The passenger starship landed on an inconspicuous little planet. Normally, passenger starships wouldn't enter a planet. The arrival of this starship caused a lot of people on the planet to panic. After the starship stopped, the passengers inside the starship also swarmed out to escape. Aiken thus and his men took advantage of the chaos to disappear. Silen did the same. There was already a spaceplane parked on the other side of the planet. It wasn't big, and it didn't look too eye-catching. After Silen walked closer, the spaceplane's hatch opened and revealed a metal head. Long time no see. You're finally back. The blue bars on Moon's face narrowed. Lying on Cheto's shoulder, Huimao looked listless. After responding to Moon listlessly, he buried his head and sighed again. Moon looked at Silen. This fat cat usually lay on Silen's shoulder. Why was he lying on Cheto's shoulder and pointing his butt at Silen? Throwing a tantrum again? Sigh, why did he say again? However, since Moon knew Huimao better than Huimao, he wasn't worried that Huimao would keep throwing a tantrum. Wheeze, I brought you something. Moon took out a bag of fish biscuits. It's a new variety. The taste has improved. The listless Huimao's ears perked up and his spirits rose. You've released a new flavor so soon? Shouldn't we wait for a while longer to hit the market? The gray cat nimbly bit open the packaging and started eating. This isn't on the market yet, Moon replied. Silen looked puzzled. Did Food King look for you? Amen. When we went to a trading center close to Sector S, Food King came looking for us. He recognized your double immediately, but he didn't expose you. He even put on an act. Did he say anything? He told you to contact him after you returned. He said it wasn't urgent, and it wasn't about the people at Sector S. Moon boarded the spaceplane and left the planet. As for the passengers on the planet, someone would come and take care of them very soon. While Moon was piloting the spaceplane and listening to Huimao talk about Sea Paradise, Silen was thinking about what Food King Hara wanted. If it was about Genya, he shouldn't have come looking for him right now. The passage wasn't guaranteed yet, and Silen had no intention of returning to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire right now. The 11th Squad had completed their mission, and was staying at the base. When Silen returned, they were training. They were planning to continue their mission, but Silen told them to return to the base first. Emohung was very happy that Silen was able to return safely. Of course, he was happy because Silen had returned safely. Secondly, he was happy because Silen had brought back a batch of rare ores. These ores could be used to refine several kinds of alloys suitable for space fighters, and they were all high-quality materials. He ordered the robots to drag the ores away, while he went into the workshop to study the ores. Silen returned to his room and contacted Food King. Long time no see, kid. Food King was still the same old Food King. The fat on his face was almost piled up. Did you get fatter again? Silen teased. Food King touched the fat on his face and sighed. Just something bothersome. Food King liked to eat whenever he was in a bad mood, but he also liked to express it when he was happy. What bothersome? Your companies are doing pretty well right now. The League of Stars might be a mess, but your business hasn't. It's not business, Sillin. This is why I called you. You know the Robert family, right? The Robert family? The family that owns the Robot Kingdom? That's them. I received some news not long ago that they're probably going to attack some of the hunters. I don't think the 4 great hunters will encounter such a situation, since the Robert family has no reason to offend them. Still, it's always good to be on guard. Amen, I understand. Thank you for the reminder. It's nothing. I'm just feeling a bit annoyed. That's one of the reasons I'm reminding you to be prepared, because it concerns you hunters. What else? There's no need to tell you the details. It's my own problem. So I work hard. Oh right, Sillin. I'm planning to expand the trade zone. What do you think about building a trade zone in Sector V? If it was anyone else, there was no way they would want to build a trade zone in Sector V, especially one related to food. That being said, Sector V was a big pancake, a pancake coated with chili peppers. It all depended on one's appetite. You want to go? I have an idea. I've done some research, but I haven't decided on a partner yet. Do you have any suggestions? I want to know what you hunters think about the other side. Sillin thinks for a moment. Let me recommend someone to you. Who? Blood-Eye Aiken of the Free Army. After the call with Food King, Sillin went to find Shikai, who was busy at the workshop. Robot Kingdom? Shikai frowned. How dare he use this title? Chapter 371. Sillin told Shikai about the Robert family, and as expected, Shikai disdained the Robert family's Robot Kingdom very much. He even went to Yudi and asked for some information about the Robert family, including the robots and semi-biological weapons they produced. Where did they get the courage to give themselves such a title? Shikai asked while staring at a robot on the screen. The screen in front of Shikai was displaying a robot that looked similar to a human. It looked similar to the 4th and 5th generation robot Sillin, and the others had seen before. Many people didn't know much about robots, but they couldn't deny that the Robert family's robots were amazing. They were just like real people. They could throw tantrums, comfort people like friends, and turn into well-trained soldiers to carry out their master's orders. Of course, that was only true for laymen. Shikai had studied the origin robots for many years. The Shi family of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire had researched the origin robots generation after generation. They knew all too well which ones were artificial implants, and which ones were special types like Moon and the others. A single glance was all it took for Shikai to see the difference. Forget identifying them with his own eyes. Shikai could tell which were humans and which were robots just by looking at the image on the light screen. If it was Cheto, Shikai might not necessarily be able to identify him. That was the difference. In Shikai's own words, these inferior goods couldn't interfere with his judgment. However, Sillin didn't have much information on him, and Yudi and the others hadn't collected much useful information. That was why Sillin asked Shi Huajing and Lung to look into the Robert family's recent movements. They had heard of the Robert family's recent movements, but they didn't know much about them. Although they didn't give Sillin much information, Lung and Shi Huajing did give Sillin some information about the Robert family in the past 2 years. The large-scale robot mutiny at Robert Friends' place had dealt a huge blow to the Robert family. Back then, Robert Friends had given Sillin the impression that he was a stubborn and obsessive man who forced himself to believe a lie even though he knew it was all a lie. The Robert family had the right to be arrogant in the League of Stars, but too much arrogance and confidence had led them to overlook a lot of things. Due to the influence of the robot mutiny, the Robert family had undergone many changes in the past 2 years. From the information Sillin obtained, even though the new models of robots didn't develop in the direction that Shikai hoped for, if they were placed on the battlefield, their offensive power would definitely be much greater. Their weapon configuration, material structure, and liquid core nuclear brain were further upgraded, allowing them to be as stable as the first generation while improving their combat power. At least until now, there hadn't been a single case of a robot mutiny. Shikai admitted that the robots in the new data had improved a lot, but that was not the type that Shikai liked, so Shikai did not focus on them. Shikai's confidence had skyrocketed ever since he created the X-series robot, and obtained a new robot named X7 that had a free attribute. X7's appearance rate was less than 1 in 1,000, and the accidental change in the program had given Shikai a lot of hints. He had been busy with his new plan, and it was because of this that his consumption of materials had skyrocketed. Moreover, he was building space fighters for the 11th Squad, so he couldn't use some of the materials he needed. Shikai hadn't run into a situation like this many times in the past. He had everything planned out, only to find that he was running out of materials. It made him so anxious that he was pulling his hair out. This wouldn't have happened in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The Shi family had been accumulating materials in the Empire for a very long time, and they had Black Viper's people and a robot army to help them sort through the materials. Why would they ever run out of basic materials? He had everything he needed except for the fact that he couldn't create the original robots. However, the League of Stars wasn't the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, so Shikai couldn't come up with any good ideas. Therefore, he told Sillin about the situation and asked Sillin for help. After leaving Shikai's workshop, Sillin was thinking about what Shikai had told him. Shikai didn't have the materials, so his plan couldn't be carried out, and he couldn't build a new batch of robots. For the sake of his plan, Shikai had even sent some of the robots he thought to be failures back to the furnace. Moon had ignored Shikai this whole time. Shikai had complained more than once, but neither Moon nor Sigma had ignored him. It was probably because he had no other choice that he finally told Celine about it. After leaving Shikai's workshop, Sillin walked into Shurtang's workshop. Shurtang had been busy with the tunnel all this time. "How's it going?" Sillin asked. "It's much more stable now, but we still can't confirm if there are multiple targets." Shurtang showed Sillin the results of his recent research. Last time, Sillin was able to return to the League of Stars from the Mist Bodhisattva Empire with the help of the Black Box and a few related tools. However, some of the data he obtained during the process indicated that the Black Box wasn't as effective as it used to be, perhaps because it was too old. Moreover, something had happened to the Black Box after Sillin and the others were transported to the League of Stars. Moon had fixed the Black Box after that, but it still couldn't return to its original state. It's fine if there's only one space fortress like the one we came with. But if the flying object is a bit bigger, or if there are multiple targets at once, I'm afraid we won't be able to succeed, Shurtang said. Shurtang felt a little guilty about this. After all, the results of his research were far too limited. What's this? Celine pointed at a rough line diagram Shurtang had drawn on a map. Oh, I almost forgot about it. Shurtang looked a little spirited at the mention of this. I've calculated the best passage point in the League of Stars, and it's true that the best passage point is where we came from. But that was in the past. If we exclude the influence of the planet that's loaded with a lot of instruments, and add in the slight changes in the overall magnetic field of Sector Z, I've calculated the best passage point based on the Black Box's current condition. And the result is, this is it. Shurtang spread out a part of the star map for Sillin to see and pointed at the marked point. After seeing that point, Celine was also very happy. This was because the location of that point was very close to their current base, and it was also a relatively remote and barren place. The surroundings were surrounded by planets with a rank D habitability. No one would go there, and it was not eye-catching. This was good news for Sillin, who was planning a trip back to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The original best passage point had already attracted a lot of attention. If Sillin was planning a trip back to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, it would be best if he avoided those people. He didn't want to get himself into trouble in the current environment of the League of Stars. However, Sigma did mention that most of the instruments on the planet where the passage point was located had been destroyed, so there was no need to pay attention to the Black Box. Now that Shurtang had calculated a new passage point, it looked like it was time to go there again. If the Black Box could be restored to its original state 1,000 years ago, then there would be no need for Sillin to search for the best passage point to increase his security. Sillin still hoped that the Black Box could be perfected in the future. Or perhaps he could create another Black Box. Sillin had studied the black box before. There were a lot of traps left behind by the Shi family back then, so Sillin had to postpone his wish to duplicate the black box. With Shi Kai and Shi Mu's help, he should be able to do it in the future, right? When the time came, he wouldn't need to calculate the best passage point anymore. The Robert family was working with the military, but Sillin didn't know which military corps they were working with. He didn't know for sure which military corps they were working with, but he did know that the Robert family had created a batch of upgraded robots for combat, and a large number of semi-biological mechanical weapons. Their first test subjects were the Hunter Regiment. The first Hunter regiments wouldn't be the 4 great Hunter regiments, but the smaller ones with weaker foundations. No one would remain stagnant. While you were improving, others were also working hard. No one could predict what would happen in the end. Food King Hara said that it was never wrong to be prepared. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't turn their guns on you the next moment. Part of the reason why Sillin planned to visit the Mist Bodhisattva Empire was because of Shi Mu's materials. Another reason was because you, Sigma, and Sillin had always wanted to visit the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. But who should I bring with me? After he left Shi Tang's workshop, he went to check on Tico. She was currently teaching Xiaorou and Kong Lujia some medical knowledge, and it had been going on for a long time now. She was very happy to have 2 helpers to help her. A fleet with only 1 doctor wasn't very secure. If a large-scale battle broke out, Tico wouldn't be able to take care of everything on her own. Medics were limited, so it was better to rely on a human. Sillin could tell that Mo Heng's workshop was as busy as a bee before he even stepped through the door. Carrie, Xiaoshang, Mogaz, and the others were all helping Mo Heng out. They hung around Mo Heng's workshop every day just so that they could own a fighter of their own. Right now, all of them were trying their best to show their sincerity and help Mo Heng build a space fighter. When he saw Sillin, Carrie placed a part in his hand at the place Mo Heng had specified. Then, he wiped his hands on the uniform Mo Heng had given them and asked, "Why are you here, Commander? We're not doing any missions for the time being, are we?" "You guys seem to be very busy," Sillin said after glancing at the workshop. Carrie chuckled. "Isn't it to leave a good impression on Academician Mo? Alright then, you guys continue to help out. There won't be any quests for a long time to come." "Haha, that's for the best." Xiaoshang, Ba Dao, and the others also let out a sigh of relief. As long as they didn't have to go on missions, they would be able to work until the new fighter jet was built. How satisfying would that be? However, they didn't know that they had missed a chance to go to an unfamiliar star system outside the League of Stars. Elsewhere in the base, Mao was fighting Shusag, and Qifeng was teaching Tesoro how to use his claws better. Everyone seemed to be very busy with their own plans. Even when there were no missions, they didn't idle around. Sillin told Shikai about his decision to go to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and Shikai was very happy to hear that. He was planning how many materials he could bring back after he returned. The Shi family was a special family in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, but it was also because of this that Shikai was restricted in certain areas. Even when it came to making robots, Shikai couldn't let go. However, things were different in the League of Stars. He had a lot of freedom. Shimu said that he was going to visit the Mist Bodhisattva Empire no matter what. He wanted to see the Shi family branch's development, explore the environment of the other galaxy, and learn about all the new technology there was. Huima was very happy. He missed both sides. He missed the League of Stars when he was in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and he missed the Mist Bodhisattva Empire again not long after he returned. The moment Sillin announced his decision, Whis had already started packing. It had brought along a lot of the new fish biscuits the Food King had given it, and since it couldn't make any more of them after they left, it didn't know how long they would be gone for. Therefore, Whis decided to bring along all of the fish biscuits it had stockpiled. Sillin thought that he would bring Tang Qiuqiu to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire to fulfill his promise and take Tang Qiuqiu to see Guanfeng. He believed that Guanfeng would be very happy to see Tang Qiuqiu. Shusag, Xiaorou, and Xiaorou wouldn't be going. They didn't have a good impression of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire to begin with, so they were happy to leave. They liked the League of Stars a lot. Even though the League of Stars was a little chaotic right now, It was still a lot better than the pain the Miss Bodhisattva Empire had inflicted on them. They didn't want to go back even if they were beaten to death. Sure, Tang was going to be testing the black box, so he would be going with him. Moon Sigma, Shimu Cheto and Silin stand in the X7 that Shikai was so proud of. Except for Yudi, Dias, Carrie, Xiaoshang, and the new members didn't know where Silin was going. They thought that Silin was going on a secret mission again. Silin had mysteriously left a couple of times already, so they weren't curious this time. It was still the same space fortress, but with a few new members. Sigma was very excited, and so was Wheeze. Tang Qiuqiu, who still didn't know what they were talking about, was a little confused and curious. What kind of place were they talking about? Another galaxy? What was a galaxy? Earlier, Silin didn't explain much to Tang Qiuqiu, and Tang Qiuqiu didn't have much of an understanding of the terms they were talking about. The more she listened, the more she felt that something was off. That was, until she saw something that looked like a giant storm ring. What is that? Tang Qiuqiu grabbed Huimao, who was about to take a nap, and asked. Huimao's tail arched. It's a very fun place. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.